Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 35 of the Elite Big Wargames podcast with myself, Ken Riley, the Yarkshire Gamer. And today we have one of the Wargames glitterati for you. It is my friend and your friend, Henry Hyde, and it's a long old conversation, as you would expect, with me and Henry. Both of us are talkers. So you can absolutely guarantee that this will go on for a while. So make sure you're well supplied with drinks and food, and you're wrapped up warm in this cold weather, and you've got plenty of painting nearby to see you through this episode. It's only a week since I did the last one with Rohan Saravanamutu, and he's talking about his book on Leipzig and wargaming, that wonderful big battle. It's a busy schedule, as I've explained before, and I want to get all the episodes I had planned to get in 2022 in before the end of the year. And this episode is half, yes, half. And if you've seen the length of time that this interview is, it's 2.5 hours. So there's more to come. So this with Henry is out today on the 11th of December, and the next episode with Henry, the second half of this interview, will be out next Friday. And then the Friday before Christmas, maybe the Thursday, I hope to have a Brews in the Vineyard Christmas special with the usual crew. And I know how much many of you enjoy those Brews in the Vineyard episodes. So looking forward to that. We've had a bit of an increase recently of new listeners. It must be we're getting each episode, the number of listens in the first week and the number of listens in the first month is going up. So if you are new to the podcast, I want to welcome you to the show. And I know a lot of you are going back and going through the back catalogue, which is absolutely fantastic to see and hear. And I've had a couple of messages today of people who've done that. So thank you for listening to Yarkshire Gamer. Everything here is free. So all I ask is the odd comment, the odd follow, the odd subscribe, just to make the profile of the podcast that little bit bigger to bring in new listeners like yourself. And for you all grognards who've been with me since the beginning, thank you. Thank you very much. In Yorkshire Gamer news, I put on my Italian Wars game at the Recon show in Pudsey, which is it's a 5-minute walk from here. And it was fantastic being able to get up very close to the start of the show and just wandering down, setting up and going, and then only having a 5-minute drive to get home rather than an hour and a half or 2 hours. Lovely little show, traditional local show, been at the Pudsey Civic Hall for quite a while now. Very friendly. It's right at the end of the show season, so it's a lot. It's the last show for a lot of people, and I chatted with many friends. Some I hadn't seen, would you believe? One of the people I spoke to has had 5 children since I last saw him, and that's not with 5 different people either. So it was great to be there. And it is something I suppose I need to explain is the title of this episode. And with it going over to 2, had a title for the second part of it, but not for the first. And whilst I've been editing the 2.5 hours you've just been about to listen to, I wrote down some notes as we were going through the conversation, talking to Henry. And Hairdryer Mud Rant is written on the sheet of paper next to me. And I've been staring at it for 2.5, 3 hours. And I just thought, you know what? That is the title of this episode. So sit down, have a listen, find out why. Without further ado, here's the interview. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the interview section of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast. And today's guest really needs no introduction, but that's not going to stop me giving him one. We all know him as that lovely wargaming chap. but he can be ruthless. In a godlike manner, my guest has been known to create entire countries, worlds, and histories, and then destroy them with a stroke of a pen. His imagination has produced many imaginations. Will we find out if Yorkshire tea is the favourite beverage on the coasts of Bathilas, a nation that sounds remarkably like me asking my wife if she's going for a wash? His podcast, Battle Chat, is approaching its 100th episode, with episode 86 being a particular favourite of mine. Previous episodes of his Views from the Veranda with Neil Shuck were so long that empires rose and fell in the introduction alone. His latest book, Wargames Campaigns, has deservedly become a bestseller. It's so heavy that there are rumours that the Royal Mail strike here in the UK is nothing to do with pay and conditions, but it's about posties refusing to deliver the book anymore without a surgical back brace. What my guest hasn't done for this wonderful hobby of ours is not worth mentioning. So if you remember the Steve Miller song, he's a writer, he's an author, and a rules designer, a gamer, a player, and a Wargames trendsetter. My guest has been on a bit of a journey, as the kids say these days, over recent years, but he is back, and he's quite literally half the man that he used to be. His new fitness video, Humping Weights with Henry, is set to knock Joe Wicks off the #1 slot at Christmas. He's the Scourge of Tartanos, the Marquis of Hyboria, a descendant of the kings of Zabia. But more importantly, he's here today to talk to you. So let's speak to the latest guest on the podcast and give a big welcome to the wonderful Henry Hyde. Hello, Henry.
What an introduction, kid. That is just fantastic.
You're welcome, mate. You're welcome.
I'm having trouble breathing here. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Ken. Delighted to be here. Really nice to have this opportunity to catch up with you. I'm not sure I can live up to all those epithets, but I fear that the thing about the Royal Mail delivery system may be true.
Well, I saw you laughing without actually making a noise a couple of times during that. Especially during the Bathy lass. Are you going for a Bathar lass?
Oh, mate, yes.
Well,
yes, everything is capable of being punned. Absolutely, mate. Anyway,
Exactly.
it's really good to be here. Lovely to be here. We finally managed to do it because obviously you came on. What episode number was it you came on, Ken? I wonder.
That really good one.
Oh, I think it might have been episode 86. Do you think?
That was the one. That was the one.
That was the one. Which is a little while ago, not that long ago, but a little while ago. And as you say, I've just yesterday, in fact, I recorded episode 95 of mine with Andy Callan. You know, never mind the bill hooks and all that.
Yeah,
lovely bloke. We had a good old chat. So yeah, number 100. Woo, sometime Christmas, New Year-ish sort of time.
Coming up. And so there's no point. My first question is always, have you been a podcast guest before? And that one, it's just pointless, isn't it?
Have I been a podcast guest that people have wanted before? Well, there we go. I think Neil wanted me on the first one and then thought, oh my God, what have I unleashed here?
Well, we have our own little fan club, don't we, Henry, after our last episode where people were complaining about podcasters interviewing other podcasters.
That's right.
So we've got a fan club already. What can I say?
And this, of course, is podcasters' revenge. What can I say? You know, if people don't like podcasters interviewing other podcasters, well, that's a real shame because today you're definitely getting that. And of course, the lovely Alex there over on his Storm of Steel and Troy, Sonic Sledgehammer, and others. You know, they're all out
exactly.
there. The thing is that we have such a small hobby. Compared to, I don't know, football or fishing or something like that, inevitably we end up getting to interview each other. But what you have to remember is that we're not just podcasters; we're also human beings.
Exactly.
we have our own lives, we have our own take on the hobby, we have our own things that we do. So I think it's fair game, frankly, to, particularly if you've heard a podcaster discussing something interesting. It's like, oh yeah, come on, let's get him on the show and have a bit of a chat about that. So I'm
Excellent.
frankly delighted to be here, Ken.
Brilliant. Well, you're going to get the full Yorkshire Gamer treatment today. The
Wow.
full 4 parts with the quiz and everything else. And I've had a number of people looking forward, particularly to some of your answers. So
Oh God.
we'll see how those go down. But the first thing that we do. The first thing that we do on the podcast is the 4-minute challenge,
Yeah.
and this is where we try to get people to. This could be an issue for you, Henry. We try to we try to get people to summarise their wargaming history in 4 minutes or less. Now, just for regular listeners, we had a bit of a test earlier on, and the usual countdown music and Di Regan telling my guest to shut it didn't work. So as it didn't in the last episode. So I'm gonna have to rethink that. But so Henry is going to get me increasingly frantically waving at him as the course of this goes on. But are you ready, Henry? Shall I press the button?
Yeah, I've set a timer. So you say go and I'll press my timer.
Excellent. Self-controlled, that's what I like to see. So in 4 minutes, Henry, your wargaming history.
Okay, so I started playing with toy soldiers, let's call it that, probably when I was about 5 or 6 years old, because my dad, as with many kids, gave me a toy fort. I think he'd made this toy fort. It had removable turrets and drawbridge going up and down and all the rest of it. And so this was in the kind of late 60s, which also, of course, coincided with the birth of the wonderful Airfix sets, HOOO, as they were called back then, 172, 176. And of course, I started with things like what was available back then. There was the American Civil War Union and Confederates, and there was the Romans and Ancient Britons with solid wheeled chariots, as I seem to recall. And so these all got mixed up together as a motley crew playing on the lounge carpet, which actually I seem to recall our lounge carpet had a kind of gridded surface, actually. It was sort of a squared pattern thing. So I didn't realize I was playing with gridded surfaces long before they became popular again in recent years. Yeah, my dad died in 1971. And that year, a little lonely boy, to be honest, and I would, mum didn't know quite what to do with me. So, pop me down in the local library while she went shopping and stuff, and that's nice and safe. And it was there in late 1971 where I discovered The War Game by Charles Grant. And that was the book that I would have to say I kind of imprinted on like a duckling, and in fact, I discovered Charles Grant before I discovered Don Featherstone. It was only after I've had the War Game out on almost kind of perma loan for months and months and months, poring over those black and white photographs of all those Spencer Smith miniatures and hearing about how Charles Grant worked out what his movement rates and stuff was. That's only then I kind of found the shelf in the library where there were other War Games books by Don Featherstone and others. So that's when I kind of started playing using proper wargaming rules. And of course, it also meant I immediately developed a love of the big battalions, the big game approach. Then through the kind of late 1970s and stuff, I discovered the Wargames magazines where there was military modeling, wasn't there? And then there was Battle for Wargamers. And then, of course, a bit later on, miniature Wargames started with Duncan McFarlane to start with all those gorgeous pictures of Peter Gilder's huge games. And then I actually got to visit Peter Gilder's Wargames Holiday Centre, and one of the big games I'll probably talk about is the Battle of Salamanca that I was victorious in as Marmont. That was a fantastic moment. So there's all that big game influence, seeped into my bones, and of course then miniature Wargames became Wargames Illustrated, and of course at the same time, round about then in the late 80s, wasn't it? It was a Practical Wargamer came into view with Stuart Asquith both as the editor. So it was kind of a boom time for the hobby, and lots of more stuff got we were able to get hold of, not just the Airfix figures. I grew up with a lot of minifigs in my life, both 25mm and 15mm, and of course aspiration. I started then getting some hinch lifts as well, having met Peter Gilder especially. Then for my sins off to university and stuff, and my wargaming largely was related to the magazines, which is why probably later on, when the internet kind of started, I started my Battlegames website, and that of course became the name of my magazine that I launched in 2006, which then became Miniature Wargames with Battlegames. And then I said, I've had enough of that. And then of course I became Patreon. In the meantime, obviously I've been visiting all the shows, particularly Salute, because it's fairly close to me, and both shows every year whenever I could of Partisan, because I absolutely love the Partisan show. It's the one show I think that really showcases the hobby. That's it.
Boom. Boom. It's not easy, is it, mate?
Cool. Yeah, and my radar's going off still. How do I stop my radar? There we go.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's not easy. It's not
I'm
easy.
Exhausted.
You need to lie down. Do we need a break for 10 minutes?
No, but what I do need is some lovely Lavazza coffee.
Oh dear, that's one mark off you in the quiz then.
Oh, sorry, mate. Sorry, mate. Well, I didn't get much sleep last night, so it's espresso all the way.
Oh, but Lavazza Rossa. Or,
yeah, Rosso, yeah, Qualità Rossa, yeah. And the best one is Qualità Oro, the one in the gold packet. So have you not tried that?
No,
beautiful chocolatey undertones. Yeah. You'll love it. Anyway, we're digressing from wargaming here, mate. Off you go.
On to coffee, which is a rare subject for me, I have to say. But when in Italy, I drink coffee, so that Rossa. And people don't come on this podcast to learn pronunciation from me.
I couldn't possibly comment, is what I have to say.
No, I once got 13% in my French O-level mock exam,
really?
and 6% in my German O-level mock exam. At which point, the schoolmaster suggested I concentrated on science. which is perfectly reasonable. So you mentioned there about that the gridded carpet.
Yes.
Is Henry Hyde the originator of the gridded Wargames table?
Blimey, I don't know about that. The trouble with the gridded carpet was it was also multicoloured. Mum had, I think back to that time, Mum had really strange taste in carpet, and but it just happened to be the grids on it, so it meant that immediately I didn't even think about it. It was just, making up rules on the spot with, I used to play games with the lad up the road, and it was just easy, wasn't it? It couldn't necessarily find Dad's tape measure, or he'd probably hidden them, to be honest. Dad had hidden his nice tape measure. So the grid on the carpet was just useful, But of course, it also, because it was a square grid, this is one of the things we're going to come into room 101 later, and it's one of my potential candidates is square grids, because it's a bit like chess. With chess, you accept it because the pieces are designed to move in particular ways. But in there's anyone who's played with squared grids knows that the danger is that there's an advantage if you move diagonally. You end up kind of moving further than if you're just kind of one forward, one across, that kind of thing, which takes two squares, whereas moving one diagonally is only one. So, it throws up all sorts of conundrum. And it was much much later when I discovered hex grids through doing my, map stuff and some of the hex and counter games from Avalon Hill, that kind of stuff. It was like, oh, hexes, they've got their own limitations, but it's kind of an improvement. But I doubt you can you pronounce tessellations, Ken?
Probably not.
He's shaking his head, folks. So probably we won't talk about tessellations. It became a pet thing of mine for a while. Prompted by a maths master who was also a wargamer, and I remember having a long and incomprehensible conversation with him about tessellations and why certain shapes you can tessellate and others you can't. And it was like, yeah, okay, mate, I'm sticking with hexagons.
Yeah, all mind-blowing stuff, Yeah. And with that carpet, you'd also preempted the modern-day trend for teddy bear fur.
It wasn't a shag pile, mate. It was kind of a woolly surface. Yeah. I think, so you got kind of hedge effects, around the edge of some of them, but it was kind of the edge was kind of a raised, woolly thing. Thinking back, it was a really weird and horrible carpet, but it wasn't shag puffers. It wasn't the teddy bear fur thing.
I mean, let's face it, the 1960s and early 1970s were not a golden age in home decor.
Probably not. I mean, some people rave about, furniture from the 1960s in particular, don't they? Get all
Yeah,
those fancy chairs and all the rest of it, and very space age, Joe 90 kind of all that sort of
yeah.
thing.
It'll all come back in fashion at some stage, and some of the stuff that you see, on these programs where they go down the tip and they get a cupboard and bring it back and paint it in enamel and then sell it for
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
500 quid. Who's buying this stuff
I
anyway?
know.
Madness.
I've got 2 words for you: repair shop. Right?
Repair shop.
The BBC's repair shop program. I've got to tell you, I other than sort of wargaming and psychology stuff, I'm addicted to the repair shop. Which some overseas viewers may or may not know. Doesn't matter. I'm so passionate about it. There's this big, tall guy, Jay Blades. Is
Yeah,
it Jay Blades OBE now? I think he is.
yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
Lovely, lovely guy. He's done a lot of work, kind of charity work and that kind of stuff. But he runs this beautiful barn, which I've been to visit actually. The
wow.
repair shop. It's not far down the road from us. It's an open air, wheeled and downland open air museum. Beautiful. And people who love crafting will love this program because they take stuff that some of which is like just wrecked, like there's people bring it. Oh yeah, we had this vase and we dropped it in 1972 and we've been meaning to get it fixed, and there it is, like this impossible jigsaw puzzle, and there's this amazing woman on the program who just sticks this jar back together in a way that you would never know it had been damaged in the first place, and
Yeah,
loads of other stuff. That's just one example, but I love the care and attention to detail that they have, because I recognize that in our hobby, Ken. I
yeah.
think this is the link
Mm,
I want to make. I think one of the things I love about this hobby is,
mm,
it's so wide ranging. It encompasses so many almost kind of separate hobbies that come together under the same roof. And it's so often, you go to a show, you've been there, Stan. You go
mm,
to a show like Partisan and you look at some of the display games put on, and the craftsmanship
mm.
that has gone into absolutely everything that's on that table, from the sculpting of the miniatures themselves and the painting of the miniatures, the creation of the terrain, the scenery, the writing of the rules and the designing. There's so much craft and love for the subject involved. How that's one of the things that it'll be with me till I die. And so the
Yeah,
repair shop, I see that with these other amazing people, whether it's kind of with leather work, or there's an amazing woman who restores old paintings and
yeah.
stuff, a guy who, you know someone brings in a jumble of clock parts and he turns it into this amazing 18th century, cabinet clock and stuff. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So, anyway, bit of a digression.
Yeah, no. Well, here's the challenge for you, then, Henry. If it's not far away, is
Go on.
get some of your old 1970s minifigs,
Yeah.
take them down to the repair shop, and see what they can do with them.
They'll say, "What's this bit of sawdust stuck between its legs?"
You'd definitely get me to watch that episode without a shadow of a doubt. And your mention of the Charles Grant book reminded me of
Yeah.
the Uniforms of Waterloo by Philip J. Haythornwaite,
Oh, yes.
which was the book that I took repeatedly out of the library
Oh,
from the
right.
first year, and I remember specifically in my final year. So, like 5 years, I've repeatedly booked it out,
Yeah.
and the librarian just said to me, "I just take it."
There was nearly coffee sprayed over my keyboard there.
Because
Fantastic.
I kind of went all doe-eyed and sad to them, on my last day at school.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really don't want to give this back. He said, "Oh, just take it. Nobody will notice.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
nobody else apart from you seen it for the last 5 years for the first
Didn't know
time."
it existed. Yeah, yeah. Fantastic.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. So, this first bit is about you as a gamer,
Mm.
and we're going to talk in the final section about you coming back into gaming.
Mm.
But have you ever been a club guy? Have you ever been in that scene? Did you used to go to clubs?
Basically, not really. And there's reasons for it. When I was at school, yes, I ran the school war games club.
Yeah.
And so that, oh my God, we're talking about, so this would be 1970, 70. I ran it from about 1975 to about 1979 when I left.
Yeah.
But then, university does funny things. You're away, and I was at a university where there was one other wargamer, my mate Guy Hancock,
Yeah.
who we were both history students, and but obviously, during the holidays we'd get together and play some games, get the miniatures out, a lot of plastics, dare I confess, a lot of unpainted plastics as well, because we didn't
Ooh.
really give a damn. But where at university I became interested in kind of other things.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
draw a
Understandable.
discreet veil over that, shall we?
We
Other
shall.
things, and one thing that's guaranteed, if you want to attract young women, parading your 28 mils in front of them isn't necessarily the right way to do it. Keep your minifigs in a drawer, chum.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, this is the era where my link with the hobby became, for quite an extended period, became the magazines. Also, I did a year abroad in Germany.
Yeah.
The third year of my degree, I was over in Augsburg in Bavaria, where wargaming was slightly frowned upon,
I
certainly
can
back in
imagine.
those days. It's in relatively very recent times that wargaming has started to become accepted in Germany. But that, again, we got to be honest, we have to thank Games Workshop for that, because
Yeah.
really because they were completely non-historical gaming. It
Mm.
kind of led the way for people to to become acceptable for people to be playing war games without them being war games. And I don't know if it still applies, but there's certain insignia. I think to this day, you're still not, if you're in
Yeah.
Germany, you're not allowed to put swastikas on your aircraft or tanks or that kind of thing, So it's
Yeah.
still a slightly prickly subject. So certainly when I was there, which was great timing, 1981-82, Ken.
Yes.
Yes, the Falklands War.
The Falklands.
And I became, I didn't want to become, but I did. I became the British ambassador to Augsburg, with lots of people at the university saying, so why have you invaded the Malvinas? And it's like, hang on a minute, we didn't invade anything. We didn't. They were ours. Why you should give them to Argentina? But the people living there, the
Yeah.
complicated
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
Falklands. And that again was like, oh yeah, better not tell them that I go home and play with toy soldiers. So my wargaming during my year abroad, again, Peter Dennis, eat your heart out. I created my own little paper armies, like
Yeah.
6mm paper armies, because I was a heavy smoker at the time. And so I always had matches on me. So I used matches and little bits of paper, folded up. So they were front on, like Peter Dennis's
Yeah.
current, paper
Yeah.
boys. And I've just painted little regiments of 18th century soldiers
Oh,
on
brilliant.
these. And I did little ships and stuff, top down model ships
Mm.
and stuff. So, and I literally, sad. I mean, looking back, how sad was this? But I had a little tiny desk in my room, in my digs, and I had a single bed but it did have a duvet that was kind of mostly green. I seem to remember the duvet
Mm.
cover was mostly green. So I played little solo battles, and that's kind of where my first imagination came into being, because there I was living in Bavaria. And I really picked up on the vibe of how the Bavarians hate anyone from north of the Danube. And, oh, yeah, those bloody Swiss over there, we hate them too. And the bloody Austrians over there. And it was like, wow. And all that 18th century vibe of all the tiny kingdoms and principalities was really kind of front and center in my day-to-day life,
Yeah.
And so that's where the idea was born. My memories, because I didn't take the war game with me because the library would have fined me very heavily. And I should have just saved up my pocket money and bought a copy, but I don't know. I can't remember. How much was it? Let me reach across to my shelf.
I'm gonna go for. Oh, is it gonna be an old money or
Yeah,
new
what
money?
was it in old money? I can't remember. It was probably something like 10 shillings. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I was gonna go 14 shillings and 7 pence.
Well, there you go. It may well have been with
I
so.
don't
And
know.
when you say pence, you mean with the D
With a
afterwards as
D,
well, of
with a
course.
D, yes.
But there it is. And I don't know. I know that I picked up the second-hand copy as an astonishing bargain for £6.95. And the funny thing is, this is an ex-library copy. It's even. I'll show Ken. There's even a library stamp in there. Can you see? Goodness me!
It's not
Returned.
it's not the one I stole from school, is it?
Returned to Oakmere Potter's Bar. So it's
Lovely.
managed to make its way down to. Where did I pick this up? It might be at Partisan or Salute, something like that. Anyway,
I don't think I've ever been that far south.
oh no, you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have.
But
You wouldn't take the heat, mate. You would.
yeah. Oh, the prickly heat had come straight out.
Yeah.
That game on the table sounds like a precursor to the Perry's Travel Battle.
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, and I mean, you've spoken to Andy Callan, haven't you? And I've spoke to him yesterday. And one of the things we were talking about was what goes around comes around. And actually, so many of the ideas that are being touted nowadays is, oh, this is innovative, this is cool, this is new, this is modern. It's like, hang on a minute, I've got a book by Don Featherstone that he wrote in 1967 up there, where something very surprisingly similar was there. And yes, the idea of the travel battle or the Paperboys armies, it's so much of what we buy into is to do with marketing, isn't it, Ken? I think this is the thing that I've been around the hobby quite a long time now. Excuse me, and I appreciate it's when you're running a war games business, it's hard. How do you grab people's attention? How do you take something and make it look new and shiny? And often it's just kind of repackaging. You get those disparate elements, put them together in a box and say, ha, travel battle. And it's like people are going, wow, that's amazing. And you're sitting there as an old timer thinking, yeah, it's nicely packaged, that's for sure. Clever. Wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
But yes, the whole idea of the travel battle and very simple rules. In fact, I think we might have had a Monopoly set in the flat where I was in Germany. So there were a couple of dice, but also I remember making myself a spinner thing. A six-sided spinner thing.
Now we're talking.
Bit of card, cocktail stick through the middle, doing the spin thing. God, people are listening to this thinking, is he from the Stone Age?
Well, I'm going to bring you up to date with that, Henry, because you can now get those spinners on an app on your phone.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and we use one quite regularly for like an artillery hit.
The direction indicator.
Direction indicator, yeah. There are dice that you can buy that do it, but it's nowhere near as cool as having a little spinny thing on you. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, for that, I used to just. I'm picking up a biro, ladies and gentlemen. I used to just put a biro on the table because back then, flat tabletop, right? Remember this? It's flat tabletop, contour hills, no danger of even a terrain mat underneath to impede the beautiful spin that you could get on a biro back those days to indicate wind direction or fall of shell or that kind of stuff. Man, have things really progressed, Ken? I'm sitting here asking myself.
Do you know what I saw not that long ago? That took me back to my youth. That is a new thing, and you're going to laugh at this. Books under a gaming mat for hills.
Oh my god, that is wow! That's just so out there. Wow, never did that. Honest,
who could think of that as an idea?
God. Dear. And the thing is, if you want mountains, just use my books. Simple as that, isn't it?
Exactly.
In fact, on Twitter, Dear Baloo, as he's known.
Oh,
on
yes,
Twitter, he was actually posting a picture of some beautiful light dragoons in tarlatan helmets, wasn't he? That he'd painted the other day. And I just noticed in the background, I recognised the spine of those two books there with my name at the bottom. So and he made that quip, and someone said, "Oh yeah, you can use them as hills," and he said, "No, mountains." There you go.
Well, you've digressed nicely there, because it always amazes me how observant, let's use the word observant rather than nosy, some
Yeah.
people are when you post a photograph on Twitter or Facebook or wherever it is.
Yeah.
And I'm building the Bismarck at the moment to go with
Yeah.
against my hood.
Yeah.
And I posted a picture of it and saying, "This is where I am," blah 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 blah. And then somebody comes back, "Oh, I love those model spruce snippers that you've got. Where did you get them from?" And I go, "What are you fucking talking about? I've got a picture of
Oh no.
a 40, 50 centimeter long model that's taken me 3 weeks to get to this position,
Yeah.
and you're asking about the model sprue
Yeah.
cutter.
Yeah.
It's not
Mate,
right."
try running a magazine. It's one of those things, and you probably already have this, doing a podcast where you'll do a podcast and, "Oh, I'm really pleased with that. It was a good conversation." Then someone will pipe us, "Oh, why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you talk about that?" It's like, well, we can't cover everything,
No,
And
no.
one of the things that was really interesting, the process when I was in the campaigns book that is out now, and I put it out to beta readers. I put together a team of beta readers, which is a pretty scary process. And it's like, oh my god, what am I going to do if they all say it's shit, Henry? It's like, oh god. But fortunately, 99.9% of the feedback was really positive, and some really useful suggestions and what have you. But there was one person who did say, "Oh, why haven't you put more in there about this particular period of history?" It's like, well, anyone could just pick their own favorite period of history and say, "Why didn't you do more about the War of Jenkins' Ear, Henry?" Whatever it happens to be. Because that's not what the book was about. I was just using some examples, but the things people latch onto. And as you say, the snippers thing, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Because I've had that because I've been painting some Dungeons and Dragons miniatures in recent months, haven't I? And people are like, "Oh, so what's that paint in the background there?" It's like, does it matter? Look at the figures. The figures. These things took me 3 months to paint. Look at the figures. But there you go.
You'll be glad to know that, and this is an exclusive. This is an exclusive. Nobody's aware of this yet. There is going to be a Yorkshire Gamer awards ceremony this year,
Wow.
and slightly different to the usual one, where it's the best war games rules and the best manufacturer and the best customer service and all that sort of rubbish. Well, not rubbish, but you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leak one of the categories.
Yeah, go
And
on.
one of the categories is the best the best wargaming troll on a Yorkshire-based podcast or blog.
Oh dear, dear, dear.
So look out for that. It's the Yorkshire Gamer Awards, also known as the Puddings.
Fantastic,
So
fantastic. So you will send in all the "I think you'll find" and that kind of thing.
anyway, I've been in so much trouble recently. I need to not get in trouble, but I could,
Mate, it's your reputation. You are the shock jock of wargaming.
the Howard Stern of wargaming.
The Howard Stern of wargaming. Absolutely. I'm
Oh,
not sure what
bless.
I am. I think I'm Methuselah or something, but you're definitely, go for it, mate.
I
Go
will do.
for it.
I will do. Puddings coming up on the next episode.
Looking forward to it.
Do you have a setup at home, Henry? Do you have a games room at home?
Oh, well, I'm in it. I'm in the Loft Vaffer, as it was christened, many years ago now. Oh, goodness me. It would have been 1998, 9, something like that. When I was still working and running a graphic design agency, and I started the Battlegames website. 18th of June, Waterloo Day, 1998. Battlegames.co.uk was launched. And Anne and I decided to have a loft conversion done for all sorts of reasons, partly so I could come and work from home. And there we are. I suddenly found myself with this, up in the eaves here with all this space and an 8 foot by 6 foot Wargames table that could be converted. It's got flaps at the end, so it can technically go up to 12 feet by 6 feet. But the
Oh,
trouble is,
lovely.
it's almost impossible to get round it because the attic's this kind of T shape, But anyway, so I was described this process on the website site back then. I mean, nowadays you would call it a blog because I was one of the first people blogging about the hobby, and I said, well, come on, let's have a bit of a competition. Send me in some suggestions to name this space. And this guy came up with the name Loft Vaffer.
Oh, that is brilliant.
I fell in love with it immediately, It's absolutely the Loft Vaffer. So in fact, it's almost like I as a wargamer rent space out to myself as a designer and writer, conceding part of the Loft Vaffer for non-wargaming use. But the thing is, as is so often the case, I'm sure you can appreciate this, is the table that's over there is more often than not just covered with crap. It's just covered with the detritus of wargaming and hobby life. And also because I'm a butterfly, I have other hobbies as well. So at the moment, there's a whole load of watercolor paints everywhere because I've been doing a bit of painting lately. And then the other half of the table, yes, is all set up with my, racks of paints, Vallejos and contrast paints, and I've got my little IKEA boxes full of foundry paints, and I've got my citadels in other boxes. I think this, I kind of. There's a guy called John Priest, in case you don't know him. John Priest, lovely fella. I haven't seen him in years, sadly, but he was one of the original old school wargamers when the old school wargaming group was launched on Yahoo. And he's a fella who loves painting with enamels and oil paints.
Oh, the
And
old school.
He's still got this astonishing collection of original Humbrol enamel paints that he's religiously made sure that they're airtight and all the rest of it. So he's got all the old Polish crimsons and dragoon greens and that kind of stuff that some of us are old enough to remember. But he paints beautifully, but he's actually got, by modern standards for most of us, relatively few paints. And he does this astonishing thing. He treats painting miniatures like art, so he mixes colors together a lot to achieve the exact color he wants. And it made me realize that, this is really weird, because if I'm using watercolors or acrylic paints to do a painting, I mix paints on the palette. Why is it when it comes to painting miniatures, I've got this preposterously huge range of paints, so I don't have to mix anything. I just reach over and pick out the precise shade of shit brown that I want, and the thing is, of course, that I'm always conscious of is this whole thing, there you are talking about wargaming trolls and stuff, and the whole thing about, I think you'll find that between March and April in 1807, British Scarlet, the supplies of madder dye were in short supply, so it actually became slightly more pink than that. Seriously, mate. The fact is, however, a paint manufacturer will probably have a paint that matches that precise moment color-wise. And of course, it's ridiculous. Because there's going to be other blokes in the same regiment who've got brand new uniforms, other blokes who've got uniforms that are falling to pieces, that are faded, other blokes who have, patched them together with this, that, and the other. Particularly as you get to, who cares what shade of khaki it is? They've been rolling around in the mud, for God's sake. How can you tell?
My mum is an artist, so I grew up mixing paint, and I do it quite often. But the one thing, and the sort of tiny little pushback that I'll give for having loads and loads of colours is this one is, and it's really come to fore with the naval stuff that I've been doing recently, because I've bought sets with the actual colours in. Dunkelgrel 51, Hellgrel 51 for the naval stuff, so that when he comes on, the internet and goes, well, I think you'll actually find that should be this colour. Before they've even got, I think you shall find out. You posted a picture of the colour with it written on that it's actually the colour.
Yeah.
And it's conversation just stops dead.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I have a lot of paint. But
it does. It does.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
But it's almost like a sense of guilt because I was the similar generation to John. He's a bit older than me, but yes, he's maintained this feeling that first of all they're just toys. Secondly, I'm doing it for me, not for anyone else. So what do I give a damn what anyone else thinks? And thirdly, he enjoys the process of mixing the colors and compare. Oh, there's a piece of artwork by, and this is one of the other things, of course, where this is such a danger. So many of us have grown up with things like the Osprey books, where there's all these wonderful color plates by, most recently almost all by Peter Dennis, but over the years Philip Haythornthwaite and others, over the years, and these beautiful color plates in these Osprey books. As a man who's worked in the print trade and has had my own magazine published, I know that there's many a slip between cup and lip, when it comes to the actual reproduction of color in a book. So what might look on screen, wow, bang, you've got that absolutely precisely right. By the time it's gone through a printing machine and you're taking into account the different paper surfaces and this, that, and the other, it's not necessarily going to actually be 100% accurate anymore. So those are, this nerd tendency that we all have towards perfectionism, that could cause so much anxiety. This is the other thing. We really ought to kind of drop it, guys, and just relax. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we talk about big games and stuff. So much of it is to do with the spectacle of the thing.
Yeah.
You're looking at the game in an entirety. But we do have this tendency. Is it because of the magazines and close-up photography, Ken, where we do have this tendency to, I'm going to get down and zoom right in on that particular Panzer Grenadier over there, or that particular paratrooper. And I was also reminded, because I interviewed Mark Urban just recently, author, BBC diplomatic correspondent and wargamer.
I know Mark quite well. I used to do a bit of painting for him back in the day.
There you go. Lovely bloke. And of course, he's just written this brilliant book, Red Devils, about the birth of the Paratroop Regiment. And I was talking about, I think I put something on Twitter about how it turns out the Red Devils got their name not because of the maroon color of their cap, of the beret. It was actually because of the early fighting in Tunisia in 1943. They were coming up against the German Fallschirmjäger in these hills in Tunisia. And they got covered in red mud. Wow. And so the Germans saw these howling banshee guys charging at their trenches, basically, and they, oh my God, Roter Teufel, red devils, right? That's how they got their name. Nothing to do with the maroon beret. And that, in just one instance there, says, so there we are. Technically, were they wearing Denison smocks? What kind of camouflage were they wearing? You couldn't tell because they were smothered in red Tunisian mud. How many war gamers are going to put on a game set in Tunisia and go to the trouble of painting that Denison smock or whatever and then covering it with basically a brick red goop, which is technically, if you want to get accurate, Mr. Nerdy, I think you'll find, that's what those figures should look like. They should look like they're just covered in mud and they've been lying in these little slit trenches in their own bloody excrement and stuff. That's how they should look technically. But who wants that on their tabletop? Answer, if you're doing a diorama for a specific event, you might model that. But in reality, a wargamer says, well, I'm going to be using them for more games than just this one. So I'm not going to repaint them to do 1944 in Normandy kind of thing.
I like that. That was an epic rant. An epic rant from Henry Hyde there. That was fantastic. Oh, we're going to get some complaints about that. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Dear.
Well, I've had a similar thing with my Italian War stuff because mine's based around the earlier parts of the war.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, oh well, you need this and you need that for the later stages of the war. It's like, no, I
Yeah.
don't. I've got 2028 mil figures. I'm
Yeah.
not changing them for
Yes.
another 2,000 figures for the later period of the war. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Very
Yeah.
kind of you for asking.
Yeah.
Anyway, we must move on. We must move on.
We must.
Yourself then, what's your favourites in terms of periods?
I don't think it's going to be any surprise that probably at the top of the list, I'm going to say 18th century.
Yeah, no surprise.
And I'm more specifically mid 18th century. I've played Malburians and I've enjoyed Malburians, but that kind of late Louis the 14th, late 14th, late 17th rather, early 18th century is one of those periods I feel like, yeah, one day I'll get around to it. I've actually got a whole load I bought as a job lot a few years ago now, a whole load of they're actually Heroics and Ross 1/300th Malburians. They're really lovely little figures, actually. Heroics and Ross, that's a brand that I bought a load of many, many, many years ago. We're probably talking late 70s, early 80s. And then I kind of fell out of love with them, and for a while fell out of love with that kind of micro gaming. But I've got that as a way of picking up 2 complete armies for a song. And actually, I was lucky because the person who they had belonged to had done a really nice job on the painting and basing stuff. They look really lovely. But yeah, the Malburian era, not really my thing. To a certain extent, that's a bit mad because obviously you probably know I love sieges. I'm fascinated by sieges and siege wargaming. And obviously, if you want sieges, that's a really good period to have a lot of sieges.
Yeah.
But I think there's no other excuse other than Charles Grant and the Wargame. It's that mid 18th century look, the Frederick the Great, War of the Austrian Succession, 7 Years' War, that kind of period, which I imprinted on and has stayed with me ever since. And it's a period that I've gamed in 30 mil Spencer Smiths and Holger Ericssons. I've gamed it in 15 mil. I've gamed it in 6 mil. I've gamed it in 1/300th. What are you thinking there, Henry? Why didn't you just stick to one or the other? And I would consider, now that Mark Backhouse has opened my eyes, 2 mil. That's an interesting point. The big semi-strategic games, particularly around sieges, that's got a lot of attraction, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's some potential there, isn't there, with that scale?
Oh yeah, I
for
think
that
we'll
side
probably
of things.
come back to this. But so the mid 18th century, because that's where my imagination was sparked about creating. Well, my first article I wrote for Miniature Wargames back in 1986 or whatever was actually called Fictitious Wars. No one called them Imaginations back then.
Yeah.
We talked to them as being fictitious wars, fictitious armies, and I fell in love with the concept of being able to create my own history, to create my own cast of characters. It took me a while to realize, what was inside me. I was an aspirational writer, and so the idea of creating characters and story and places, I fell in love. This is the other thing. I fell in love with creating maps, creating worlds. It started off like Charles Grant, just a couple of neighboring countries, but then it kind of got carried away. Particularly once in later years, more recent years, I started saying to other people, can I come and play with your, in your world, Henry? All right, I'll tag on another country here and there. And suddenly I realized, okay, that's already an entire continent. And then this guy said, hello, Andy, you know who you are. Said, yeah, I'd quite like to be this other country that's kind of across the ocean, a bit America-like. Oh, right. So that means there's going to have to be a big ocean and another continent on the other side. Okay, right. And then, Simon Tonkins, bless his heart, Goat Major. Hello, Simon. Yeah, Henry, what I'd love to do, would it be okay? I'd like to kind of actually take the role of someone commanding some of your Prunkland armies, and but something with a kind of colonial twist, and so we came up with this idea of this, the Prunkland's East India Company kind of thing, which then of course again implies, oh right, that means that there's something happening over there as well. So it led to this monstrous project I undertook of Dalia Chindristan, where basically I misdid the scale on the map and suddenly realized what I had actually created was an entire continent of many thousands of miles square. But the 18th century is great for that, because the reality is that the 7 Years' War, it has been described by various historians as the First World War.
Yeah.
And it's true that it kicked off everywhere. When you think that out in India and stuff, Clive of India and all those kind of things, and what's happening in America, the Americas and South America and elsewhere, Europe, obviously the cockpit of Europe, and the most extraordinary period of history. And I think it was that kind of richness that Frederick, a lot of people say, it was dominated by Frederick the Great. Well, Frederick the Great had a key pivotal role, obviously, in Central Europe because of that particular situation with Prussia outnumbered by and surrounded by potential enemies. But that's just a very kind of myopic Eurocentric view of things. When you step outside, you look at what was happening with the British Empire and the French colonial ambitions and all that kind of stuff. It's like, wow, Frederick the Great was a key figure, but not in the same way that Napoleon was, and probably the Napoleonic Wars are my second. And the reason for that, a combination, funnily enough, of Charles Grant and Peter Gilder, because can I pluck here we are. I'm going to pluck another book off my shelf here.
Off a magic shelf.
Charles Grant, Napoleonic Wargaming, where the cover and inside are festooned with fabulous photos of Peter Gilder's setup at the original holiday centre. And of course, it was the Waterloo game that he focused on. And by a strange quote, this is a little footnote, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that was so confusing and irritating about this book, lovely though it is that the photographs bear no relation whatsoever to Charles Grant's own rules. They were Peter Gilder's in the Grand Manor rules, right? That were being used. And so I spent ages poring over these beautiful photographs. But what Charles Grant doesn't mention anything about mounting your troops in sixes on bases or mounting your cavalry like that and this and that. And so I don't understand. There's no correlation between the photographs and the rules in the book. And he just basically, it's an old-fashioned 1970, whatever it is, 76 was it? 74 example of eye candy. It's like Peter had obviously said, do you want to take some pictures of my setup to make your book look pretty? And a gorgeous cover.
It is.
Nothing to do with the rules inside. How annoying is that? But anyway, I digress. But Napoleonic gaming, because of Peter Gilder's setup largely, and certainly that, that riot of uniforms. The 7 Years' War, actually, uniforms-wise, is extraordinary. It's incredibly colourful and varied, and you get the birth pangs of all those exotic units like Hussars and Croats and so on and so forth. Then you get to the Napoleonic period, and it's like dialed up to 11, isn't it? Just as a visual spectacle, you don't have to be a young boy witnessing too many Napoleonic games at Wargame shows to think, I want to be doing that. And back then, gosh, let's say mid-1970s. So I was at school wargaming club, and there was a lad there whose name, sadly, I forget, who had started collecting. Now, who remembers these? Hinchliffe System 12.
Ooh.
Right? Ooh. Ken, you're looking like even you haven't heard of this. Hinchliffe, briefly, and you go back to the old pages of Military Modelling and Battle for Wargamers, and you see the adverts there. They came up with this all-encompassing wargame system called System 12, where it's 12mm, which, of course, now
Warlord Games,
Warlord and Callistra repopularizing.
Wow.
But you could buy not just the miniatures, but they had terrain pieces like road sections and bridges and river sections and all kinds of stuff. I'll have to see if I can. I've got millions of old magazines. I have to see if I can find something for it. But if you Google, I'm sure if you Google
Yeah.
Hinchliffe System 12,
Wow.
you'll find stuff. And this guy had, I don't know, a few hundred figures aside of British and French, and they looked great. And so, but back then, I think back to the rules that we played back then, Ken. It's like, oh my God, how did that ever persist in being a war game? His favorite rule set was the Newbury rules, right?
Oh,
1 inch
yes.
equals 10 yards, one man equals 20, one figure equals 20 or whatever. All sorts of horrific calculations for morale and firing and all that sort of stuff. But I was at that age, I kind of mentioned earlier, where all that data didn't bother me.
Yeah, it didn't bother me either.
As a teenager, it's like, wow, it was almost like I'm being set a test. Can I pass this test and learn all this stuff by heart? You know, all those casualty tables. Oh, yeah, well, there's +1, +2, but that's all -1 there. And the heavy hard covers, that's a -1. And then, the range is like a +3. Oh, yeah, but they've, oh, yeah, but they fired last and moved last moves. That's a -1. And, oh, yeah, so you got 23 figures at +4. That's 78, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Now it's like, how many sixes do I need to roll? Right?
But that was have we just got lazy? Have we just got lazy?
Well, maybe.
Has technology changed? I mean, I think I said on your podcast, I do a lot of engineering calculations at my work.
Yeah.
So I still juggle figures on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
I'm not as scared of the old rules as many people are. I do
Yeah,
get it.
yeah.
I do understand why people are afraid of it. But
Yeah.
do you think that we don't do those mental calculations like we used to? And that's maybe that little bit of our brain that's switched off?
Yeah. And here's a really good example. Your best mate, what's his phone number?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't need to remember his phone number because it's in my phone. I just, Bob. Oh, yeah, call Bob. In fact, I don't even know how to press it. Siri, call Bob.
Bob, yeah.
Right?
If there's anyone out there playing this in the living room and Siri has actually just called Bob, Henry now apologises profusely.
Oh my God. I'm reaching up to my shelves over here.
Henry is at the magic bookshelf.
You can probably you'll probably know why I'm
He's just got quarry. Okay. He's just got quarry. I can see a quarry in his hand.
Here we go. The first one. You know, we moaned about the Newbury rules. Then along came Dear Bruce Quarry in 1974. This slim little book. God bless Airfix, bless them. God bless Airfix, because they produced a whole series of slim little volumes to aid wargamers and modelers, loads of them. And some of them were actually kind of little turning points in the hobby. And this was certainly one of them. Bruce Quarry's Napoleonic Wargaming, the Airfix Guide, magazine guide for Napoleonic Wargaming. Wow. This was a head turner back then, because you want data. You've got data. And then, of course, he took it to the next level with his Napoleon's campaigns in miniatures, which I've got.
That book is brilliant.
This went to like 4 or 5 editions. I've got them all here. Because just in case I missed something, and I'm a completist. What a nerd. This was first published 1977, second edition 1982. And absolutely stuffed full of data for the passionate Napoleonic wargamer, so long as your 33 times table were up to scratch, Kim?
Yeah, 3. Well, see, the easy thing with that, top tip here for everyone, obviously quarry rules are coming back. 3 is 100 is the easiest way to remember it, and just take one off.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way to remember it.
But then you do get, because it's all done, all the casualties are calculated in men. Yes. So you get things like, right, so your guard artillery there have just unleashed canister at that Russian column, and they've caused 173 casualties. Yeah. So you better be on the ball to know that, that's 5 figures plus whatever remainder that is, right? Yeah. How did I remember that 165 is 5 figures? Oh my God. It's more ingrained in my blood than I realized.
You've not lost it. You've not lost it.
But there's also things like where, if you turn a battery, because he'd worked out all the rates of fire.
Yeah.
And of course, the joke is that here he's reckoning he was being so precise, imagining that British infantry were always able to fire 3 rounds a minute, you know, taking no account of weather conditions or the fact that they've mostly had dysentery that morning or whatever it is, you know, or the officer said, well, stop firing, we can't see the target because of all the smoke. Yeah. But there we are, religiously 3 rounds a minute, and your 9-pounder British artillery guns can fire 3 rounds of canister per turn or whatever. So if you're turning your gun for 4/5 of a turn, does that mean you can still loose off 1 round of canister? And
you're going back to the discussions of my youth over a Wargames table.
Mate, we all had protractors back then. Of course we did. You mounted your artillery on equilateral triangle bases just to make sure that there were no arguments.
Did you ever meet Bruce Quarry?
I never did. I gather he was a slightly controversial figure. I'm being very polite here. It turned out that he had a slight love affair with the SS or something of the kind. Yeah. He wrote books about, but I'm, that's allegedly, I think, is what we have to say. But he obviously, when it comes to Napoleonics and World War II, those were his real things. He loved it. Here's a spread for you, Ken.
I love that page. I used to know that back to front.
What I've held up there, ladies and gentlemen, is a page with all the different armies: Austria, Britain, Confederation of the Rhine and Italy, France, Poland, Portugal, and it goes on further pages: Prussia, Spain and Naples, Russia, Scandinavia, with all the what he called national characteristics reduced to numbers. And by reduced to numbers, we mean every different unit had a different fire factor, melee impact factor, melee confused factor, morale factor, control factor, and then different movement rates for line, column, and on road. And here's, let me just give you one example from France. Okay, so your typical line fusilier. Okay, your line fusilier can march 120 millimeters in line, 140 in column, 160 on the road. But a line grenadier can march 140 millimeters or 160 millimeters or 180 millimeters.
Longer legs, Henry, longer legs.
That's what it would be.
You had to be taller to be in the grenadier, so longer legs, right. You go further.
That's right. But what happened, and I saw it happen in games, because some players less experienced and more, shall we say, button countery, would take this absolutely literally. And so as they're marching forward a battalion in line, it would start to break up, because they would say, oh, yeah, but my grenadiers are allowed to march 20 millimeters further than the fusiliers. And you're like, no, mate, that's not how they would have done it, right? They would have marched to the slowest pace. Yeah, but it says I can go 20 millimeters extra. It's like, is it a race to get to the enemy first amongst the companies of your own battalion? Mate, you're going to end up with this yawning gap and morale deficits and exposed flanks. Yeah, but I'm allowed an extra 20 millimeters. Yeah, whatever. And then, of course, perish the poor man who was in command of Prussian Landwehr.
Yeah.
Because where is it? Poor Prussian land. Where's Prussia? Okay, your Prussian Landwehr could move 60 millimeters in line, 80 millimeters in column, and only 100 millimeters on the road. So
very generous that was as well.
Wow, these boys are going to lag behind. But ladies and gentlemen, It's almost like I developed a passion for Napoleonic wargaming almost in spite of that, because I think for Napoleonic gaming in particular, it became the spectacle of the thing as much as the game itself. And funny enough, it might have been, and yes, Andy Cannon again, I was chatting to about this. One of those things that I love about the hobby, and one of the things I love about big games, is that moment where, do you know what? All I want to do is stand there and look at it, or even squat down next to the table so that the table's at my eye line and look along those ranks of troops heading off into the distance. Because what you're reproducing is those amazing battle paintings that you've seen in the museums and that kind of stuff. It's this the idea of the Wargamer's tableau as a moving tableau. And that's a magnificent thing. And, you know, I grew out of Bruce Quarry's rule sets because, you know, 1 to 33, you end up with units of like 16, 20, maybe 24 figures, but under his rules, arrayed in a single rank.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, and this is one of those other big debates that has always come up in wargaming, isn't it, Ken? About, you know, we can be so nerdy about getting things accurate in terms of, you know, movement distances and firing rates and all those kind of things. But so often the depth of our units is wildly out of proportion with the frontage of the unit. This is why a single rank of figures is kind of technically more accurate in terms of the space occupied by that unit in reality. But a single rank of miniatures just doesn't float my boat. There's no other way to put it. No. And this is where, you know, talking about the big games, why do I love big games with lots of miniatures with, you know, large units? It's got something to do with that, you know, a unit arrayed in at least 2 ranks of miniatures, to my eye, and it's obviously a very personal thing, just looks a lot better than a unit arrayed as a single rank of figures, unless that unit is skirmishing or something.
Yeah,
you know?
It's a discussion that's come up with my Italian War stuff, because the front rank of my pike blocks I like to have with levelled pike, and I use steel pikes with sharpened ends. So I've extended the base to it's 110 mil, so that the fronts of the spears, the pikes, are protected by the base, and that's mostly to protect the players.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with some fancy, you know, ground scale or anything along those lines. It's because if they do, and one day I had a game on at Recon in Pudsey at the weekend, and I got at least 2 finger pricks that led to blood. So they're very, very sharp. So a couple of people have got, oh well, how do you deal with the depth of the unit in terms of your ground scale? And what happens if somebody, you know, brings that up in a game? Well, I said, 1, I don't, because I really don't care, because it looks a lot better. And 2, if somebody brings it up at a game, they're out of the door, because because those are the questions like, what would you like from the bar? And are we having fish and chips for lunch? Are acceptable questions at the Wargames table. Why are your figure bases so deep? You know when your brain switches off? So anyway, well, we're doing well, mate. We're on 1 hour and 8 minutes, and we've not even finished.
Is that all?
Well, we've not even finished the first section yet. So
right.
We're doing well. We're doing well. So the final section of part one. The final section of part one is the Venn diagram of wargaming.
Yeah. Listeners, he's moving me onto that. I haven't even finished that section yet.
No, he hasn't. Oh, you said you're going to be away for 7. We've got no chance at this rate.
Oh God, yes.
Well, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that my favourite period, 7 Years' War, mid 18th century, Napoleonics, probably post 1800, Peninsular War specifically. Love the Peninsular War, and the last early World War II and Desert War. I like World War II before the super weapons start
Yes,
arriving.
yes. Oh,
I
yes.
love the quirky vehicles. I give me, a little Czech tank, whatever, something like that. Give me a quirky Matilda lumbering around, this unstoppable tank armed with a pea shooter,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Love it, kind of. So 1939 through to about 1942-ish.
Yeah.
1943, kind of the tiger arrives, doesn't it? And you
Yeah.
start getting like, oh, blimey, tigers, panthers, that kind of stuff. So those are my three favorites, historical, and I do like a bit of fantasy gaming. I've got to admit, I've never got turned on by sci-fi.
Yeah.
I feel that sci-fi, that's what computers are for. So you can actually fly around in space and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, for my sins, a bit of what would now be called old hammer, early Warhammer-y stuff. And as I've discovered, Dungeons and Dragons, but my blend of Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of an admixture of Warhammery stuff. So I've got Skaven as one of the races, and pure. What edition am I foolishly playing? 5th edition or something, which is horrific. Books full of rules, man. But that's as much to do with the storytelling element. And I probably haven't mentioned. You don't know this, Ken. I've been doing improv courses, literal acting improv courses locally, as a morale boosting thing, a way of just doing something completely different than I've ever done before.
Was that where that inner rant came from earlier on?
Oh no, I've taken my inner rant to improv. I'm actually me and my group, we're putting on a performance this Friday night in front of a live audience,
fantastic.
which is like mad. I haven't done anything like that since university days. But anyway, so those handful of things, and I think this is one of those things. As we get older, we're learning to rationalize. Yeah, I've actually got like 20 different periods of stuff on my shelves. Probably about time I started going on eBay and getting rid of some of it. But those things there. So I dabble in a bit of fantasy, but not sci-fi. All right, on to your next bit.
No, because you've now brought more things into my mind
about
what you were talking about. So just very, early war desert, I absolutely love it as well, and we've got surprise, surprise, huge range of 28mm figures for that, and I love the old A9 cruiser tanks and A10s and A13s, and it's kind of we're discovering what this war is all about, and maybe those ideas that we had pre-war weren't so good, so let's try and fix them. And we have a cut-off date of the 31st of December 1941, and if your vehicle is not in the desert at that date, you can't have it on the table.
Wow.
So it cuts out all the long-barreled Panzer IIIs, so you're still on short-barreled stuff. So it's a real nice, even matchup, and we've had some fantastic games. There's a book by Robert Avery called on Operation Compass, and it's got 28 scenarios in, which are amazing, and we're playing through those
brilliant.
over the years. We're on about 14. We've been going for about 6 or 7 years. We'll talk about campaigns later on. So controversial question then, just to finish this bit. Lord of the Rings, is it historical or fantasy?
Wow.
Because to me, I'll stick my neck above the parapet. To me, we've been sort of immersed in the Tolkien world for so long and so deeply in many cases. Virtually everyone I know who's a gamer, has got extremely well thumbed copies of Lord of the Rings. Some even made it to page 7 of the Silmarillion, and these people are amazing.
I read the whole thing, mate, and the unfinished tales.
But and then you've got the films and everything else that's come since. So that bit, is it creeping? Is it creeping to be part
that? I think it's really, really interesting because also one of the things about God, I remember talking with Neil Shuck on View from the Veranda about the use of this word, plausible.
Plausible.
One of the things that is really important when it comes for me when it comes to fantasy or imaginations
Mm.
gaming or anything, when you're talking about war games rules, really is this discussion about is it accurate or not?
Mm.
We can never say 100% certainty that it's accurate, but what we can say is, oh, it's plausible.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's extraordinary about the Lord of the Rings as a body of literature
Mm.
is, yes, there's magic in there. Yes, it's, all sorts of stuff happens. When it comes to the fighting, and particularly the way Peter Jackson portrayed it in the
Yeah.
movies, of course, it's incredibly plausible because it's a medieval-ish sort of battle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Medieval-ish, Renaissance-ish, Dark Age-ish kind of battle, and they went to extraordinary lengths to make it plausible. And I think that's a really interesting point, Ken. I mean, technically, of course, it's not history, but you could certainly say, well, it's kind of alternative history, which is what Tolkien intended it to be. I think that if you were to say to Tolkien, "Oh, it's just a load of fantasy," isn't it? He would probably take umbrage at that.
Yeah.
First of all, he would take umbrage that, well, is calling something fantasy an insult anyway? Because I
Mm.
know that there are certain war gamers out there. Oh my god! It's spit fantasy, right? Whereas my feelings are much more inclusive than that. When I wrote the Wargaming Compendium, fantasy got its own chapter, just like it's another wargaming period.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's World War One, World War Two, there's fantasy. And why not? Because I think this is the other thing that, if we're talking about, as we might do, Room 101 later, and pet hates and stuff, I hate divisiveness in the hobby.
Yeah.
I hate anything that creates barriers in
Mm.
the hobby. And the thing is, it's so hypocritical as well, because I know so many historical gamers like myself who would probably say, yeah, primarily I'm a historical
Mm.
gamer, but I also play some fantasy, some sci-fi, some this and that, some board games, whatever. So overall, I'm a gamer.
Mm.
And certainly when it comes to the Lord of the Rings stuff, when you look at the way that the Lord of the Rings stuff was produced by Games Workshop, those extraordinary ranges of miniatures, the
Amazing.
trouble they
Amazing.
went to, the accuracy, the detail, the quality of the sculpting by guys we know, the Perry twins and Ali
Mm.
Morrison and others, da, da, da. The trouble they went to was the same as if it had been a range of historical miniatures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely the same. In the same way as, Alan, bless his heart, who's constantly cranking out more and more Napoleonic miniatures and making sure that, every buttonhole is correct.
Yeah.
When it came to Lord of the Rings, they made sure that everything looked exactly on the tabletop the same as it had done in the movies.
Yeah.
Which
Amazing.
is an extraordinary
Amazing
thing.
work. Amazing work.
So I think that that's a really interesting point, Ken, that is Lord of the Rings, would I put it in the same book as, in inverted commas, ordinary fantasy, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. The thing is, because I'm a big fan. There's another fantasy writer I'm reading at the moment, Joe Abercrombie, who writes what you would call grimdark stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it's pretty grisly. The characterization, though, is phenomenal. Anyone out there who's not read any Joe Abercrombie novels, start with the Blade Itself trilogy and go for it. It is the most phenomenal writing, and his writing about warfare
Mm.
is incredible. And his writing about warfare is as absolutely plausible as if it was a purely historical treatise.
Mm.
And he describes his novels actually don't have a lot of magic in them. So it really is like, wow, that's like ancient medieval Renaissance warfare, absolutely to a T, even down to guys suffering from like PTSD and stuff.
Wow.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely amazing stuff. We've kind of got off track here. I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to give a special place to Lord of the Rings in that Venn diagram.
Excellent.
Right. As you do, that it's not pure historical gaming, but it's so much a part of our culture now, as if it were history. So yeah, that's a good point.
I am unashamedly 28 mil big game historical player, but I've got a massive Rohan cavalry army
Oh wow.
that's been on the table once. I think it was supposed in the book. I'm talking like it's history. Um, I think there was supposed to be 6,000 cavalry in the charge of the Rohan at
Yeah.
Pelennor Fields, and I've got that at 1 to 20 and 28 mil, and I've
Wow.
never used it.
No, seriously.
No, I've used maybe 3 or 4 units in a little game that we had at the club of that War of the Ring that Games
Yeah,
Workshop
yeah.
brought out, but it was just a fantasy project
Oh mate,
for
I would love
myself.
to see that. I'd love to see that laid out on a table at Partisan, even if you did nothing with it. That must look
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
it's a lovely theme. So we've digressed both. You digressed me, and then I digressed you, and then so anyway, readers, listeners. So finally, Venn diagram of wargaming.
Yes.
Right. So I kind of try to break it down into 4 different sections, and I like to ask
Yeah.
my guests where they see themselves with the different sections fitting together for their own
Yeah.
personal hobby. So
Yeah.
we have wargamer, we have painter, we have
Yeah.
collector, and we have historian. So where do they fit together for you, Henry? What's your Venn diagram?
I think the truthful answer, surely, for most people is it depends when you ask me that question.
Oh,
Because at certain times I get to play more games, so I'd say I'm more of a war gamer.
yeah,
At other times, like over COVID, when the hobby, was very quiet for me, I was a collector, painter,
yeah,
historian.
mm,
In the midst of that, the other kind of factor I have to add in is I'm also a writer about wargame, which means that in the course of writing a book like the compendium or the campaigns book, I indulge certain aspects to test them out for the book. But I suppose on balance, nowadays, if you were to walk in the house today and ask me where I lie on that thing, God, where am I? That's so hard because I've been I've been painting a load of miniatures just
yeah,
lately,
yeah,
but they're Dungeons and Dragons
yeah,
miniatures. But I interviewed Mark Urban, for which I read his book Red Devils, which is historical. I'm playing a game on the 30th of December, but I'm actually umpiring, DMing a Dungeons and Dragons
mm,
game, so I'm doing all the prep for that. The last actual war game I played, wow, was a game against my editor Phil Sidner of Pen and Sword, and that, you're going to be shocked, was last February.
yeah.
And I'm horrified to hear myself say that. I might have played a game over the internet with my mate Jay Arnold,
Veteran
a
wargamer.
veteran wargamer, but that would have been a board game, Commands and Colors,
Yeah,
something. Was it Napoleonics or medieval? I can't remember, something like that. So, but then at other times, if I'm lucky, I get to play quite a few games. So I
yeah,
would say, oh yes, gaming's what's dominating my life. So that's not a simple Venn diagram. But the things I lately, in recovery from cancer and the breakdown and all the rest of
mm,
it, painting miniatures has given me a great deal of pleasure. That's for sure. So, collecting. It's almost like I'm becoming an anti-collector at the moment. I'm trying to shift some of my collection because I've looked at my shelves. I mean, you're a prolific painter, Ken. I
yeah.
admire you hugely. I'm looking at my shelves and thinking, there's no way on God's earth I'm going to get all that stuff painted before I die.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully I won't die for quite a long time, but still I'm looking at it and going, there's no fucking way.
Yeah.
And I can't, because of economics and all the rest of it, it's not like I can afford to pay someone else to paint them
Yeah.
either. So just realistically, and this is where my interest in psychology comes, why am I beating myself up? Why am I allowing myself to sit there staring at me, making me feel like shit? Yeah, you haven't painted them, and because the self-hatred thing is a thing that, and I've come to understand, a lot of us can suffer from, So I don't want that in my life anymore. So do you know what? I'm just going to get rid of a load of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just going to go. And then the stuff that's left on my shelf that I haven't painted yet is definitely the stuff that I'm thinking I want to paint that because I want to have the satisfaction of completing those armies or whatever. Now, some people will throw up their hands in horror that some of the stuff I'm going to carry on keeping is plastic Spencer Smiths from the 1970s, you know, assuming they haven't crumbled to dust yet. I haven't checked them lately. But yeah, the focusing on what's really important to me in the 18th century imagination stuff, I kind of took a detour. You know, earlier we talked about the fact that I invited a load of other people, bless their hearts, and I loved it. You know, it was a great experience. Invited a load of other people to participate in my world, and they, of course, raised all their own countries and armies and stuff, distracting me from my own task of, well, hang on a minute, I had plans for these countries dotted around Prunkland and Fountainland and their armies, and I'd started designing the uniforms, and I just put them on hold for like 10 years or more.
Yeah.
I think it's time I allowed myself the pleasure of just at leisure. This is the other thinking. At leisure, without the thought of, oh, I've got to crank them out because there's a game going on, you know.
Yeah, so you're not your gaming isn't driving your painting and driving your collecting, because that happens to a lot of people. Well, not happens. That's their Venn diagram.
Absolutely. And obviously people who love putting on demo games at shows like Partisan or Salute or whatever. You know, I think of people like the lovely James Morris or Steve Jones or whatever, and other regulars who you will see at Partisan and whatever. You get to a show, it's like, wow, that's a completely new game from last time I saw them. And that's how they roll. It's like their hobby almost revolves around, because I love putting on games at shows and I want to put on something different next time. So that drives their painting, it drives their terrain building and all the rest of it, so that they've got something fresh to show at the next event. Wow, I admire that. It's a long time ago now. I've done that a couple of times. Oh my God, the pressure of, oh my God, we've got to put this thing on the table at the show tomorrow and the paint's not dry yet, kind of thing. I was like, oh, I've realized it's just too stressful for me.
I've had figures on radiators the night before, before a show.
Yeah, hairdryer. Wow, this is something I learned actually through painting watercolors. There's I've always loved painting with watercolor, but things went to the next level because I discovered there's a guy who lives kind of literally opposite me. Turns out he's an internationally renowned watercolor painter. He does beautiful, beautiful paintings. A guy called Cecil Rice. Look him up, folks. He does amazing watercolors. And he gives lessons, you know, to supplement his income. And one of the first things I can remember walking in and setting out my stuff, you know, and there's his stuff, and next to his block of paper and his paints and all the rest of it array, there's this hairdryer. And it's like, so what's the hairdryer for? He says, oh, I haven't got time to wait around for all the colors to dry naturally. That could take hours. No, use a hairdryer.
Wow.
And this was the tip. It's like, the difference is I'm an amateur, he's a professional. In the time it takes me to produce one painting, he maybe can produce 2 or 3 because he needs to, because he's got to try and get them out there and sell them, right? It's just hot air, Henry. So imagine, instead of cold, grey, rainy England, you were painting in southern Spain instead. Man, your paint's going to dry a lot quicker in southern Spain than they are here in Sussex, mate. So I achieve southern Spain temperatures with a hairdryer, right?
Awesome.
Use it in the right way, because obviously if you're not careful, you can you point it at your paper and the paint just goes spreads out. But of course, the other thing is, you know, you can use that to create special effects. So you can actually it's like blowing on your paint on the paper. It's like, oh my God, mind blown. And so now I tell you, next to my painting table where I'm painting all those D&D miniatures, first thing that comes out is the hairdryer. That's for sure. You know, you want to, because this whole thing about speed paints and all the rest of it. The fact is, how fast do you want them? I can make them twice as fast, that's for sure, using a hairdryer.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I'm looking forward to the Henry Hyde Battlegames hairdryer coming out very soon and, and, and available from good web stores.
Exactly. It's almost like instead of a hair salon, it's a painting salon,
Yeah.
isn't it?
If you had a red hairdryer with the Battlegames logo on the side of it,
Do you know what?
I
This is
only, I only
falling
want
into.
10, I only want 10%. That's all I want.
There you go. I have got a red hairdryer. And guess what I'm going to be doing is putting the Battlegames logo on the side.
We'll make
Man,
millions,
we've
mate.
got off track here.
We'll make millions.
So I don't know if that answers your Venn diagram question,
it
Ken.
Does, mate. It does.
At an hour and a half in or whatever it is. Does that answer your Venn diagram question?
It does, mate. It does. Thank you
All
very much. And then just finally, before we take a break, social media. Where can people get hold of you? What are you on? Twitter, Facebook, etc.
Oh, very easy. I'm at Twitter. At least Twitter tells me it's at least 3,500 people know that I'm at Battlegames on Twitter. So if you look up at Battlegames, and on Facebook, there's a Battlegames page. So facebook.com/Battlegames. I'm there. I'm also, for my sins, I'm on Instagram, though I don't do as well. I haven't done as much so far there and again, I think I'm at Battlegames something on Instagram. And of course, like a lot of people recently, I've opened a Mastodon account. Just in case. But literally, I've posted nothing there, to the disappointment, I'm sure, of the other people who are more keen on Mastodon. Because you know what it's like when you first open a social media account, Ken? It's like you need to kind of get it first. Every social media place has its own kind of feel. And I think, like a lot of people, I mean, I bless their hearts, Nick and Rich of Two Fat Lardies, like me, are quite outspoken in terms of, oh, come on, let's, we've built such a fabulous corner on Twitter. Trouble-free, largely. I know you stirred it up, Ken, but largely trouble-free corner on
always my fault.
Twitter. The miniatures wargaming corner. And because I've posted some stuff about Warhammer and D&D, there's been some fantasy gamers and D&D gamers crept in as well, kind of peeking in the door of our little corner of Twitter, and it's really lovely and supportive. That's where I am most of the time. If you want to find me and get my attention most quickly, wave to me or whatever you do, tag me on Twitter, though that's a pet hate I will come back to. Actually, people randomly tagging you just because they want your attention, and you go there and it's like, why have you tagged me?
That's
no idea.
Very strange.
Yeah, but there you go. But Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, if by all means, like me or whatever you do on Mastodon, but don't expect to see very much there. But I also have another Facebook page for my shot, steel, and stone horse and musket rules, which I almost keep forgetting that I've got. But that's on the to-do list.
Yeah, exactly.
But there you are. That answers your question, I think, Ken.
Excellent. And I'll just finish by saying that Twitter, Wargaming Twitter, is an amazing place, and I love it so much. And occasionally there is a bit of sniping. Usually at me, but I don't mind. I can take it. What summed up Twitter for me was a few weeks ago, a month or so ago. I put a post up. Here's my tutorial for shell splashes for World War II naval, and within 3 posts, somebody had got a picture of Kevin Keegan with the Brute 33. If you remember the splash it all over ads. And then somebody else put the Henry Cooper ad up, and I thought that's why I'm on Twitter, because it's not we're not nobody's up themselves there. It's all
it's a lot of really lovely banter, and also and on a personal note, when I was going through the cancer treatment and stuff, the support I got on Twitter was amazing. I did progress reports and I was doing videos and stuff. The support I got from the people on Twitter was phenomenal, and I will always be grateful for that. Seriously, just really good people.
There's a lad called Ken Hanning who's going through a similar thing at the moment, and yeah, the support that he's getting on there is amazing, and I
Yeah.
think and I hope that it gives him a bit of comfort through
Yeah.
what he's going through.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are 1 hour and 34 minutes into what is normally a half-hour section. But if you came to this
We'll speed up on the rest.
yeah, if you came to this podcast thinking it was going to be short, then you are delusional, I'm afraid. So we will take a short break, and we'll be back in a minute to talk about big games. We're going to talk about big games, Henry. That's what
Oh,
happened
that's
there.
right. That's it. I knew there was something. I knew big games would come in there. Some having talked about big games on and off throughout the first part.
No worries, mate. No worries. As I just mentioned there, ladies and gentlemen, you all know part two, big games. Regardless of where my guest comes from and what they do, I always like to get people's opinions on big games, which is what I enjoy and what I do. And please don't take the word big for better. I've never said that. It's just I enjoy. When we go back to that Venn diagram of wargaming, big side of it is definitely me. So, as with everyone, Henry, what does a big game mean to you? What appears in your mind when you hear those words?
I would. There was a time when undoubtedly I would have said Peter Gilder's Wargames Holiday Centre,
Yep.
30 foot by 15 foot or whatever it was, with walkways in between every couple of tables, and thousands upon thousands of. Well, back then they were technically 25 mil, weren't they? Scale
Were,
cubes meant
yeah.
nowadays
Yeah.
28 mil, 32 mil. The thing is, this is interesting because again, I'm going to mention Andy Callan again, because we yesterday this kind of subject came up where he was talking about the latest, never mind the Bill Hooks rule set he's done, and the kind of size of armies that he's aimed that at. And he said, oh yeah, probably no more than 150 miniatures aside. And he said, yeah, because nowadays people short attention spans, haven't got the time to spare, too many demands on the time, just not interested in doing it, blah 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 blah. And it reminded me again that, am I happy about that? Because I was brought up in that generation where getting together for a war game more often than not meant the weekend. You would invite someone to come and stay at your house for the weekend to play the game, have some dinner. Once you're old enough, go to the pub, whatever, get up the next day, finish the game. And this, of course, is the appeal still of places like Mark Freeth's Wargames Holiday Centre, and there's a couple more, 2 or 3 more now, and they're springing up for those of us that love, first of all, the spectacle of a physically enormous game, a game where there's almost kind of a physical job to do. I can remember a number of times, because with Mark Freeth, I was responsible for getting the Don Featherstone commemoration weekends underway a few years ago when Don sadly passed, inspired by his friend Ron Miles. And we started these big game Don Featherstone commemoration weekends at the Wargames Holiday Centre in Basingstoke, which at the time was in standalone premises on an industrial estate somewhere near Basingstoke, which now Mark has kind of switched around, and they actually take place in a Holiday Inn, I think it is, or something like that.
Yeah, I was down there last year.
Yeah,
for the Don Featherstone weekend.
Exactly. Mark, like facing reality like everyone else at the moment, had to cut his overheads, but somehow manages to organise putting on these enormous games, but in the has to be said, the relative comfort of a pleasant hotel, where there are facilities and a bar and nice coffee and all the rest of it. But there is still, I feel, a place for that, where you are presented with the option of playing games with a collection that you could probably, most people, not you, Ken, I know, but most people could probably only dream of having.
Yeah.
Because most, the fact is, this is something we're constantly having to convey to on my podcast, the American listeners. American houses are huge by comparison with British houses. American houses very often have basements, and that kind of thing. People like Jim Perky, bless his heart, lives in what, lovely guy. Jim, you live in what we would describe probably as a mansion, mate, with a vast basement, with what he calls a closet of lead. A closet of lead where I remember when I interviewed him, he confessed he lost an entire Russian army. He misplaced an entire Russian Napoleonic army in his closet of lead. How big is this closet of lead, right? It's a TARDIS. But for most people, of more limited means, limited space. So we make all those decisions about literally downscaling our hobby or downscaling the miniatures or, crikey, I've only got a 6. I can barely fit a 6x4, And this is one of the things I realize I'm blessed that having got this loft conversion done, I've got a permanent 8x6, which I can extend if I want to, and if I don't mind, losing a bit more weight to squeeze around the ends, But there is something that I still love about a literally big game on a big table. Not so big you can't reach the middle. This is one of the things, mentioned the War Game by Charles Grant again. His table was 9 feet by 7. Have you tried reaching the middle of a 7-foot wide table?
Well, we actually, when we did Jutland, our table was 8 foot wide.
Really?
Yeah. And
did you use croupier's pushy things?
You see, the clever thing was that because your battle lines are so far separated apart, you'd only actually reaching in to the first 4 or 5 feet.
Yes.
Yeah, you see.
Oh, yeah, good. Range of fire. They're not actually going to come to grip. You don't melee between ships.
Yeah,
basically.
I might look stupid, but I'm not.
Well, under those circumstances, for naval gaming or whatever, you got long range shooting. Absolutely correct. Very well. He's a bright boy, ladies and gentlemen. He's not as stupid as he looks. But anyway, so that's nice. But that's generally the case. About 6 foot wide is kind of the normal maximum, and that's. I also remember over the years, size of table being dictated by the size of sheet of hardboard or whatever you could buy from the local DIY store, which now probably you get lengths of probably 2 meters or whatever, but it used to be kind of 4 foot wide. I remember I had a table that was 8 foot by 4 foot for a long time when I was back home in Southend. Anyway, there's something about a literally big table with lots of beautiful terrain on it, carpeted with miniatures. That absolutely just floats my boat. And more than that, I think has a genuine role to play in teaching players about command and control. One of the things that I've seen so often, and I know Mark at the Wargames Holiday Centre will echo this, you can have, let's say it's a 30 foot by 6 foot table or whatever at the Wargames Holiday Centre with X thousands of miniatures on it. It's a typical Napoleonic game, so each player's in command of, say, a division, thereabouts. And the way that game can so quickly break down into not one big game with the units being coordinated by clever commanders, it becomes half a dozen separate, smaller division-level games with the bloke on one side of the table, completely focused just on the guy to the other side of the table. And it's almost like this invisible barrier pops up between them and the next couple of guys along. It's the most extraordinary thing. And then it comes down to the skill and ability of, if there's someone put in overall command to play the Napoleon or Blücher or Wellington or happens to be, how good are they at being like a real top level commander, moving amongst the different divisions to see how things are getting on, checking with those players, right? How are you do you need any help? or having the guts to say to that player, "Oh God, I'm doing really badly. I need reinforcements," and that commander saying, "Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to feed out reinforcements in penny packets. I'm holding a reserve for the crunch moment," because that takes real skill. And having a group of players who actually have formed a real team where they actually give a damn about what's happening next to them, let alone what's happening on the far flank. You can forgive people for, well, he's 30 feet away. There's nothing I can do there. But at least the guy next door, oh, yeah, we could help each other. And if you're in the middle, you've got two guys next door, let's see what we can do to help one another. Coordination. And I think the big game really has a role to play in teaching people about that higher level of command and control, where, mate, you're not just the colonel deciding to turn your battalion into square and loose a volley, right? That is beneath you almost. One of the problems with a lot of war games rules, of course, is they do call on you to be both, captain, colonel, and brigadier and divisional commander. Your head's kind of split across all these different levels of command.
One of the interesting things about what you've just said there, it harks back to a conversation I had with Richard Harris, who runs a Wargames holiday centre up here as well, and we were talking about how a lot of people have criticised in the Grand Manor as a set of rules because there aren't any command and control rules in there. But exactly as you said there, the command and control actually comes from real command and control between the players. And although that's something I've done naturally in all the big games I've played over my life, I've never really thought about that in that context. And I've kind of looked to some of the more modern rules that put command and control restrictions on you within the rule set. As maybe we need to do that for a bigger game, without realizing that like, as you say, it's already there, and you learn that. My mate Ian, I love you, Ian, mate, but you can be a nightmare. Down the other end of the table is going to do exactly opposite to what you've said, and you will be fighting your bit, and you'll look over, and what the are you doing? And that's all part of the big game, very, very, very much so. And those thoughts that Andy had are what I had when I started the podcast. That most people don't want to do this anymore, and I thought, well, let's see, shall we? Let's do a podcast about big games and see what people say. And I tell you what, mate, I can't believe how many people listen and how many people comment. And one particular comment was, and I'm not going to tell you who it was, but they're known within the Wargames stage. He goes, "Thank F for that. It's not another effing skirmish game. I'm really effing glad that you've done this." So, which was brilliant, because I was starting to get to the point where we were in lockdown, so there was a sense of being alone anyway. But I've seen, this starter game come out for 20 figures and these new rule sets for no more than 100 figures. And I'm thinking, I've got units bigger than 100 figures. What am I going to do? And that relief when literally it came flooding in and we do that. Because there's loads of little silos of gamers out there, isn't there? 5 or 6 players. They don't really go to clubs, but they just do their thing on a nice big table. So,
there's so many interesting things coming out what you just said there. Let's go back and address the command and control thing first of all, because I think of huge respect for say Rich and Nick at Two Fat Lardies, where, as you say, command and control and what they would call Clausewitzian friction is front and center in their games, whether it's rolling dice to determine what you can do or drawing cards or whatever it happens to be. And my feeling is this, that when you've got a game at a relatively low level where it's just Ken, come around, have a go. Just the two of us. I've come to realize, there's a place for that.
Yes.
Because you have got an individual gamer trying to represent or being forced to represent different levels of command. And so having certain things that are taken out of your control by random events or whatever can actually add something to the game. You can, whether it's in terms of, again, I'm going to use that word plausibility rather than necessarily in inverted commas accuracy, but certainly in terms of plausibility, in terms of just the sheer challenge of, like a video game. Oh, can you get through in spite of all this friction happening? That in itself took me a long while to get used to it, to be honest, because I came from the relatively frictionless big game direction. But it's like, now I can see, a game of Chain of Command or Sharp Practice or whatever happens. Yeah, I can see that. When it's one player against one player, it's almost like, that can really add something. But as soon as you start moving into the multiplayer dimension, it's exactly as we've been talking about there. The players themselves add their own friction in terms of their interpretation of the battle, in terms of their relationship with the other players, whether it's the player opposite them or the player on their own side. Because I think back to, the big game that I will always remember, Salamanca at the Wargames Holiday Centre. People are so, not that again, Henry, not bloody Salamanca. But yes, because in this context, it's really, really an accurate point to be made about the different dynamics between. I was given the job. Everyone else took one pace backwards. I was the mug who stayed standing there when, so who wants to be General Marmont? Everyone else said, no, thanks. Right. I suppose it'll have to be me then.
Yeah.
And of course, I think it was the Leeds club were there opposite us playing the British. And what became clear was that I'm being as delicate about this. There was a certain degree of politics at work in that club at the time,
especially as I might know them,
right? And there were certain key figures in the club who felt like they ought to be given particular roles.
Okay, yeah.
To which other people simply deferred. Whereas it was on our side, sitting in the pub in Scarborough before, the night before, it was a democratic decision. All right, well, okay, all right. So then it was like, right, let's do. What roles have we got? Let's look at the table. Okay, who do you think? Which of you do you think enjoy this kind of role with light cavalry out in the wing? And my man, I'll do that. And I like lots of solid art. All right, let's put you in the pivotal bit of the middle of the battle and all the rest of it. So the allocation of roles was very democratically decided. And also the decision before the game, before we moved a miniature, because in those days you started the game just with blanks. I don't know if you remember used to like blanks, little wooden blanks before you even put miniatures on the table. Working just with the map. Okay, this is what we're going to do, guys. Is everyone signed up to this? And I am going to keep the heavy cavalry, only dragoons and some horse artillery, as a central reserve, so that if whatever happens, either to the good or to the bad, we have got a reserve. Because this is one of the other things that can happen in a big game. It dissolves into all these little mini things. And right, will you contribute to the war? Oh no, I need it. I need that battalion. No, I'm not giving it away. So it was decided before the game, we've got this reserve. And it worked perfectly. The British were squabbling amongst themselves, and it was uncoordinated. And some people were more interested in doing keeping their prissy line very straight rather than getting there the fastest with the mostest and all the rest of it. And they ended up, anyone who knows the Battle of Salamanca, there's the Arapiles, the hills in the middle of the battlefield at the hinge point, which are absolutely key to the battle. And one of my guys, it was one of the divisional commanders, and he had the artillery, the heavy French artillery. And he kept saying to me, should I limber up and move forward? And I said, no, just keep firing. Because as soon as you limber up, that's a move gone. You move however far, not very far with artillery, that's another move. You unlimber there, that's another. So you've lost 3 rounds of heavy artillery at that key point. Just bloody keep firing. And he was as good as gold.
Yeah.
And my lads out on the flanks, just draw the British forces away from the Arapiles, make as much trouble as you can out on the flanks. And they again was good as gold. You know, my mate Guy with the light cavalry, he gets banged in hopeless charge after hopeless charge. But the British, like, squirrel, they were drawn to the fact that the French were so active out on the wings, they hadn't expected that. Oh my God. So they were fed reinforcements out to the flanks.
Yeah.
And what a glorious moment. I, as commander, suddenly saw there's a gap opening up in the British centre. And I just launched half a dozen regiments of dragoons or whatever it was, and the horse artillery straight at the the lesser Arapiles and smashed through the middle of the British line and just rolled them up. It was literally flank after flank after flank. Didn't have time to form a square. They broke. It was the most magnificent moment. And the British were horrified. And oh my God, some of the arguments you could hear breaking out amongst, oh my God, how did you let that happen? Well, you told me that. Absolutely. And that was an absolute classic example, Ken, of where if you actually talk properly about teamwork and you do, I keep thinking of it, people who love Star Trek, even historical war games like Star Trek, Captain Picard, right? Next Generation. The absolute model of good management where he listens to, he invites input from his various sub-commanders and then formulates a plan, gets them to agree to the plan, and then goes ahead with it, right? As opposed to the dictatorial, this is what I think, just do what I say kind of approach.
Yeah.
Which most people in real life, let alone in a war game, will just go, fuck you then, frankly. Yes, Henry does swear, folks. I was brought up in Essex, right? But that's what can happen. People just like, oh God, who does he think he is? Bossy boots. So that is, in my head, it's only possible either in a big game or an enormous game of the kind that Paddy Griffith used to run, big Kriegspiel type games. And of course, the big war game with miniatures is only really one step down from the big Kriegspiel that's actually used to train officers and staff officers, So it's got a huge validity. And in some contexts, of course, as I say, literally the physical space being occupied, we've got a table 30 feet long where the person at one end of the table literally doesn't know what's going on at the other end of the table. In the same way as a commander in a real battle, one thing we don't have in our war games, unless someone's a very heavy smoker, which is out of fashion these days, you don't get the literal fog of war of clouds of black powder smoke and all that kind of stuff. So actually having a physically big table is as close as we're going to get to that, really. But I also wanted to say, Kim, that one of the things that's become possible because of the advent of more smaller scale miniatures and the terrain and stuff to go with that, reaching its current apogee with obviously Mark Backhouse and his strength and honor rules and the 2 mil stuff, is you can have a big, huge battle on a picnic table. So if you want the experience of commanding huge numbers of men in a big battle, you can still have that in first of all, a financially affordable way. As long as you adapt to your painting style and you're not trying to put eyeballs on 2mm miniatures, right? In a way that you can achieve painting large forces in double quick time. And this is, this is one of the places where, of course, things like contrast paints and that kind of stuff can come into their own to get decent results very quickly. And you can get, and this is one of the things I discussed with Mark when he came on my podcast, you can get that real bird's eye view where you are literally looking down on this extraordinary tableau top down of all these units maneuvering on the tabletop Some of those paintings, again, talking to the lovely Sydney Roundwood and other
Mm.
people, you go to museums and you see those beautiful kind of 17th, 18th, 19th century paintings of
Mm.
huge battles. If that's the look you want, well, you can do it in micro scale, and there's nothing
Mm.
to stop that.
Mm.
And I think that's if we're looking for a successor to big wargaming, that's a worthy successor. But if
Mm.
someone, I can understand, what's the price of a 28 mil miniature nowadays? It's not as cheap as it used to be. Thanks to Putin and others, we're all tightening our belts and the rest of
Yeah.
it. I can understand why someone looks at, I'd love to have a 28 mil French Grande Armée, to
Mm.
take on the Russians at Moscow. Can't afford that. What
Mm.
I can afford, how I could afford to do it in 15 mil,
Mm.
12 mil now with the epic stuff. You can do it in 6 mil, you can do it in 2 mil, and still remain faithful to that notion of the experience I want
Mm.
is of commanding big forces in a big battle. And obviously, but what lacks is exactly what we were just talking about, which is you don't literally get the physical impact of an enormous game on an enormous table with multiple players.
Yeah.
Uh, and but I mean that's in a sense, I suppose that's just something we're going to have to accept as well, Ken, isn't it? That the reality, as Andy
Mm.
was saying on my podcast yesterday, that people seem to be under more time pressure nowadays, don't they?
Mm. It's. I think we mentioned it when I was on your podcast about that deferred pleasure, or I think you had the correct terminology for it. Um, the when I saw that big game in Northern Militaire in the mid
Mm,
'80s, it didn't frighten me. I didn't
yeah,
go, I can't do that. I went,
yeah,
I want to do that. And
yeah,
I talk a lot on this podcast about aspiration, and we tend to silo our war games projects into what am I going to do next summer, or what am I going to
yeah.
do next week at the club, rather than going as I am at the moment in looks at the date in 3 years' time. I'm going to be doing the Battle of Pavia at the Royal Armouries in front of the Pavia display.
Wow.
So I'm planning for 3 years ahead
Yeah,
and building, big Spanish and big imperialist armies to go with the armies that I've already got. So
fantastic.
people tend, and I'm not overgeneralizing when I say that most people do like things a lot quicker.
Yes.
When we sent off stuff for 3, 4, 5 weeks through the post, it would
Yeah,
arrive.
yeah, yeah,
Now you see people on Twitter, if it's not there in 2 days, I ordered this from such and such a games and it didn't come. When did you order it? 2 days ago.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So I, there is a lot of people out there who still do those big games, and
yeah, yeah,
and since I've started this, a lot of younger players have kind of come and had a chat at a game,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we've talked about, because
yeah.
I don't think there's anyone in the hobby who, regardless of what they play, doesn't like the look of a big
Yes.
game.
Yeah.
Whatever the scale is, if it's a 30-foot table with 6 mil stuff on, like Per Broden does,
Yes.
you're going to go, wow.
Yeah.
So that wow factor's there, regardless of your scale.
I think the other thing is what we've kind of left out as well is the collaborative aspect.
Mm. Yeah.
Because one of the things, as a lover of big games myself, one of the things that happened with the Imaginations campaigns that I was running, it brought together 2015, 18, whatever it was at its height, guys, each of whom went away and raised their own Imaginations army. There's no way. I mean, actually, when we did the very first game, which was, oh my God, when was that? Like 2011 or something like that. I've lost track of time. Up in Ayton, right
Mm.
near Scarborough, organised by Mark Phillips, known as Peeler
Mm.
online as well. I, actually, most of the figures on that enormous table were mine, my Spencer Smith
Mm.
collection. I was startled at how many I actually had, and it it was enough. Many. I've lost. I think I might have been able to put something like 1,200 figures or more on the table. And some people have got a few of their own, and it kind of made, for the climactic battle of the weekend, it made for a pretty damn good spectacle. Charles Grant eat your heart out. It looked damn good.
Yeah.
And what happened, that I was delighted, inspired the players to say, oh, well, okay, I borrowed Henry's miniatures for this weekend. Oh, next time I want my own. And they went away and raised their own forces. They were happy for me to provide a lot of the background, fluff about the countries and all the rest of it, which I'm more than happy to do, because they kind of appeared from a parallel dimension to take part in this world I'd already created. It's a bit weird rationalizing the whole thing. But anyway, what it meant was the next time we did it, I brought along all mine, but also, wow, these people had raised in the intervening year hundreds of figures of their own. So the next battles were enormous. And so for the 4 or 5 times that I organized it, these games were vast, enormous. I think the table ended up being like 36 feet long by 6 feet wide.
Oh, brilliant.
And just these, I mean, I look back at the photos, the terrain obviously had to be kind of temporary terrain because it was in a village hall, right?
Yeah.
So it was like various types of cloth with terrain put on top, but still, it didn't matter. All those troops, many of them exquisitely painted, just looked fantastic. And again, because we were using my own shot, steel, and stone rules that I did originally designed for like 2-player games, with like a dozen units aside, that kind of stuff. I was amazed they stood up to being used for these enormous games.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is exactly what we've been talking about. The command and control issues developed from the players themselves, where if they collaborated between their teammates, they did well. If they just said, here's my 6 feet, thanks very much, I'm just doing my thing. Not so much, and they were enormous. And this is the other thing about a big game. It's hard to convey. Big games played over entire weekends, because we start off on the Saturday, we'd probably have two games that most people would think of, oh, that's a big game. Followed on the Sunday by an enormous game. That's probably, there's big games, and then there's, oh my God, enormous games. And the Sundays were definitely enormous games. The sheer sense of having taken part in something that's bigger than would have been possible on your own, right? That there's something about that collaborative team aspect that, when it comes off, is hugely satisfying. It literally is greater than the sum of its parts. And it's the culmination of so much. There's the campaign time building up to it, so the prelims and all the rest of it. But the respect for each individual who's put all that effort into creating their own armies, in this case, designing their own uniforms, doing some of the mad conversions people did as well, particularly kind of the Bizarbian North African ones, camel gunners and things on elephants. And I remember, I'll never forget, Mark Phillips had wanted some elephants, but he had giant elephants. And he contacted me first as he said, Henry, can I have giant elephants? I said, why do you want giant elephants? Oh, I was at a jumble sale. I found these 4 candle holders that are like elephants, but with a thing for a nightlight candle in the back, which would be great to kind of put troops inside. And it's like, all right, okay. Henry come up with a special rule for these enormous elephants that might collapse under their own weight or whatever. And there was something that was just so satisfying about, running a game, having umpired it, and then running the games, seeing these players getting so much satisfaction from just participate. Whether they won or lost was almost immaterial, just participating in this extraordinary thing. And one of the things, you've spoken to Richard Harris, and I've spoken to Mark Freeth and stuff, and one of the things Mark has certainly told me is he hardly ever plays games himself these days, but he gets huge satisfaction from seeing the pleasure people get
Mm.
from playing games with the stuff he provides.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that is an interesting thing because it's almost you're getting, as the organizer of the game, you're getting this kind of vicarious
Mm.
pleasure, aren't you? And also, again, what you were saying about the deferred satisfaction,
Yeah.
you know, of uh, working towards something over an extended period of
Mm.
time is something that so often, you see people are under pressure. Oh, I'm having a skirmish game. I've bought this fire team of like half a dozen figures and I'm getting them painted in time for the club this weekend. It's a very different kind of thing. And like you, it's like there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what floats your boat, if you get your kicks out of small unit tactics and that kind of, and one of the things, because I've been doing the Dungeons and Dragons, the level of characterization and personality that you can feed in at that level, which is impossible when you're dealing with a cast of thousands,
Yeah.
is its own form of pleasure and satisfaction. But it's quite a different one. And one of the things I've become really interested in is this notion of story and the way that in a small scale thing like Dungeons and Dragons or skirmish gaming, story can emerge because of the individual personalities of individual figures and their fate, in the God, how long does a skirmish game represent? It can just be minutes, can't it?
Mm. Yeah.
As opposed to the many hours or days of a big game.
Mm.
But a big game also has its own sense of story, its own epic sense of struggle, its own epic sense of survival, where you're talking not necessarily about the fate of individuals, but we all grew up on the Black Watch, the Scots Greys,
Mm.
the Charge of the Light Brigade, where it's the units and even the divisions which take on a kind of personality of their own. They share a fate of their
Mm.
own. And when you're commanding a division and you see your favorite regiment buckle and break, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, definitely,
Right?
definitely.
So I think this is the other thing. A lot of people can get, and because I talked a lot about story, because I'm literally writing stories as background for the dungeons I do, but I also do that for my imaginations as well, because
Mm.
story's the thing I'm interested in itself. But even if you're not someone who's an aspiring writer, fighting a big battle, story kind of emerges whether you like it or not. And there are those big battles have those key moments and they can go right down to the wire. This is the other thing that's so often, I've heard people, oh, yeah, if I put on a big game, I can never finish it. Well, if you set out with the intention that whatever the conclusion is by the end of day 2, let's say,
Mm.
that's what it's going to be. Actually, I find that the players do kind of get a bit of a giddy up on and
Yeah.
try to achieve something before the close of play. And that decision to do the giddy up can sometimes work. Yes, we've broken through into open ground. Hey! Or it can be disaster. Oh, crap. Perhaps I shouldn't have launched my heavy cavalry at those squares,
Yeah.
Marshal Ney,
Yeah. It gives an end objective, doesn't it, to a
Yeah.
game? And sometimes in my discussions about big games with people where they haven't enjoyed it, they've just had a bad big game, and
Yeah.
you can have a bad small game.
Yep.
Um, uh, and going back to that first section and the Venn diagram of wargaming, I am very much a painter collector.
Mm,
I enjoy gaming, but I can live without it.
mm,
So I'm in a situation personally where I've got collections of a couple of thousand figures. What am I going to do with it games wise?
yeah.
Do I want to take 20 of them down to the club and play a skirmish and
Yeah.
leave 1,880 behind?
Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, I don't. So it's just it's just that thing that the way what scratches your itch for the wargaming
Yeah.
is it how you wargame.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
one thing you mentioned a little bit there was the commanders. We were talking about command and control,
Yeah.
and Bruce Quarry, if you remember, we've looked at that table for the units, but he
Yes.
also had that table for the commanders, if you
Yes,
remember,
yes,
and
yes.
they would each have an attack factor and a
And a
defensive
defense
factor.
factor. That's right. Yeah.
Well, if you think about your wargaming mates and the people that you've played games with, there's always going to be that guy who likes to hide behind a wall
Yeah.
and not go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that person who's the dashing cavalry commander who
Yeah.
will fly across the table with the heavy cavalry, whether you want them to or not.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
so you kind of, each person has their own personality that is then reflected in the game.
Yes.
That if you look back on history, you can say, well, he's a Marshal Ney.
Yeah.
Oh, he's an Oudinot. You know,
Yeah.
you can
This is
see.
part of the skill. If you
Yeah,
appoint a commander in chief in a big game,
yeah,
that's part of their skill. Where hopefully, I mean, it was kind of weird when I did the Salamanca thing because there was only one other person in our team that I knew, my mate
yeah,
Guy, and there
yeah,
was like 5, 6 other guys who like I'd never met them before in my life. Whereas obviously the advantage should have been with the Leeds club,
mm,
where they play against each other every week. And exactly as you're saying, over that, I, again, looking back to the game, I was quickly able to assess there was one guy on our team who was quite an introvert sort.
mm,
And you could just tell, like, yeah, if I order him to charge, he's probably going to find a reason not to.
yeah,
He was quite happy just gradually maneuvering his battalions, keeping them nice and neat and lined up. So there's no point appointing him, as you say, in charge of
yeah,
the heavy cavalry that needs to make the breakthrough. And you're absolutely right. You can look around your friends or your club members and go, yeah, okay, in defense, oh, he's a +3.
yeah,
In attack, not so much, right? Maybe a -1 even.
yeah, yeah,
And people are different. People can just get flustered in different situations. Some people are really good under pressure
mm,
and so can take it when, they are in charge of a division that's being attacked by 3 enemy divisions. They won't crack until their troops actually crack.
mm,
They won't get flustered by that. In fact,
yeah,
some people even take a certain joy in that, like a Marshal
yeah,
Zhukov.
yeah,
And there's other people who are, yeah, I'm going to give him the light cavalry
yeah,
because he is going to be great at working his way around the enemy flanks, making an absolute pain in the arse of himself. And that, again, come back to Salamanca. My mate Guy was brilliant at that, you
yeah,
know. And even more specific, if I'd given him heavy cavalry, he wouldn't have been as good. He was much more of a kind of I like annoying, a bit
annoying
of an annoying
people. Yeah,
character, but he had this way of, if it'd been an Ancients game, you'd put him in charge of the horse archers, right? He's going to go around the flanks and harry them and harass them, and they're going to turn to try and shoot at him, and he's off again, and they're going to damn and try and chase him again, and he's off, and then he's back again and harassing them, and that's what he was brilliant at. I fully admit I'm a heavy cavalry guy.
yeah,
I'm a guy, that Salamanca game for me was perfect. Give me a block of regiments of heavy cavalry, armored or not, and give me that. The technical term is the coup d'oeil. It's the spotting that precise moment where it's now, boys,
yeah,
up and at 'em,
yeah,
bang, there's a little gap. I'm not going to let you get away with that. Bang, smash through the middle. That's what I like. It can go terribly wrong, of course. If you're up against a very good opponent who is like, if they know me too well, I'm going to sucker Henry into, this. And then he'll find himself getting charged in the flank by my Polish lancers or whatever. That can happen. Hands up. I can get carried away with it.
yeah,
But for me, that's part of it's. I'm a risk taker.
yeah.
I'm the guy, stupid man who started his own Wargames magazine, for God's sake, right? Nearly went bankrupt because of it. I'm a risk taker in life,
Yeah.
and I'm a risk taker on the Wargames table.
Mm.
And this is probably why I've really struggled with games like Chain of Command, where if you're a risk taker, you can get really badly punished. Yeah, perhaps you should learn to be a bit more cautious in certain situations. Oh, fuck, it's only a minefield. Let's get right. So,
And I think that develops the other way as well, in that you recognise the personality and character of the person that you're playing, or part of the team that you're
Yes,
playing.
yeah.
And a good commander in those situations will have their own command and control to exploit those weaknesses or
Yes.
strengths, if you like. Because, like you say, if you've got that Henry Hyde character with that big chunk of heavy cavalry, you're going to go, right, if I just leave a little hole here, he's
Yeah.
gonna get excited, isn't he?
What I can say is I've been in most big games I've played, and it is the vast majority. I've been very lucky
Yeah.
where that thing happens, as I'm saying, that because I'm very good at looking to either side. Right, I'm very good at I because I understand that thing where people tend to concentrate on their 6 feet of table. They kind of almost feel like, well, so long as my troops are kind of butting up next to that guy's, I'm kind of okay. I'm quite good at spotting where there's a little opening happens between that person's stuff and that person's stuff, and piling in where they're least expecting it. At the moment they're least expecting it, because they've got lulled themselves into a false sense of security, and it is almost kind of like, oh, squirrel over there, and bang. Sorry for shouting, but that's part of the joy I get out of the game. And
if you read historical reports of battles, in World War II, you hear about people looking for the gap between corps or the boundary between corps and attacking at that place because they know it will cause command and control confusion.
Look at Rommel. I mean, in my campaigns book, there was going to be, we had to cut it, unfortunately, because otherwise the book may never have appeared at all, ever. I wrote a whole chapter, which I think I'm going to release as a standalone kind of book, because I think there's enough material in there to really kind of show my passion for certain bits of his. I wrote about the Battle of Marathon. I wrote about, I think it was Edge Hill in the English Civil War, and I wrote about Rommel in France in 1940. And Rommel, now there's a genius who could see exactly what you're describing. Oh, there's a gap opening up between the French and the British there. So where am I going to go? Bang. It's one of those things you see. Blitzkrieg's an interesting kind of concept, isn't it? One of those things that you often see in war games is that people will see a place of resistance, right? They will see a bunker, they will see a stone wall with enemy in it or behind it, and think, right, oh, I need to beat that enemy. Oh, this is going to be hard. I've got to get them out from behind that stone wall or out of that building. Rommel would be like, sod the stone wall, go round it. Go round it. And suddenly that unit that's taken all that trouble to hunker down behind the wall is completely exposed, because did they think about protecting their rear as well? No, they didn't. So you send a couple of panzers round the side. Oh my God, just unzips the entire enemy line. And that's what he did historically to, well, as we know, fantastic effect, sent the French and the British skittering back to the Channel coast. And on the grand tactical scale, that's what I love seeing in a war game, where you get, when you think of Napoleon at Austerlitz or something like that, or, Ney as a cavalry commander generally, and other certain historical moments there have been where you can get dazzled by, oh, the big enemy blocks. What about the gaps between them, folks? Attack the gap, not the enemy themselves, because then the enemy is going to have to readjust to deal with what you're doing. The whole thing about initiative, taking the initiative from the enemy, not playing their game. And I think it's one of the things that can happen. A lot of war games can turn into rather stolid, plodding affairs, because what's happening is everyone's just like some kind of dance, conforming to the other player's moves all the time, which means you end up with this slightly formulaic, all right, bang, bang, charge, crunch, crunch, without much movement happening. Whereas it doesn't have to be like that. No. And one of the things I feel is that a good set of war games rules should allow the unexpected, the unusual. Anyway, I'm going to shut up. What section of the program are we in here, Ken?
We're still on part 2, mate. We're still on part 2. We're not even finished part 2, and I'm only on question 2 of 5 on part 2 as well.
Right, I'm going to shut up now. I'm not going to say
it's
another
fine.
word.
It's fine. Did I think I brought you on to not talk?
They call me they call me Silent Hyde, don't they?
Yeah. If anyone sees the trailer or the promo for this and they see that it's me and you talking, they're not going to go, well, that'll be over in half an hour. I think we managed to make a cup of tea last 40 minutes at Partisan, didn't we? Anyway,
Dear.
so we serious moment now, because I like you very much, Henry, but you do need to make an apology to the people of Yorkshire, and you might not remember this.
Okay.
But you spoke to Mark Freeth some time ago on your Battlegames podcast, and
Yeah.
you described Yorkshire as, I quote, the bleak Yorkshire moors. And I'd just like to point out that that is an area of outstanding natural beauty that is revered throughout the world and has many millions of tourists who come to see our beautiful countryside, Henry. So,
Oh
would you like
dear.
to?
I consider me contrite. Do you know what? I joke, no kidding. I absolutely bloody love Yorkshire. I think it's a fabulous place,
Yeah,
and I've had some very, very happy times there.
yeah.
And it's just the people, you know. The
What can I say? I mean, it's an open secret that I was born in Cheshire and I came
I
to
know. I was going to
and
say, what are you
I
doing?
came to Yorkshire when in the 1980s, and
Oh
I've never
dear.
looked back, and I would consider myself an honourable Yorkshireman.
Yeah. I
Uh,
tell you what, it's a bloody lovely place, and it's a lot less crowded than it is down here in Sussex. I can tell you.
yeah, yeah,
One of the things I've been living here long enough now to notice that because Sussex has got some beautiful countryside, absolutely
mm,
gorgeous countryside, and there's nothing I like better than turning off the main roads and just twiffling down a little country lane, whatever, just get to see what's there. And it's not as easy to do that as it used to be
mm,
because, an awful lot of folk have moved down from London or built second homes or whatever. And there's an awful lot of places in Sussex now that are not as empty as they used to be,
mm,
sadly. And that's one thing that certainly Yorkshire has still got is
yeah,
that thing that I love that you can feel. You can drive, you can go somewhere, go for a drive and not see another car for like half an hour or
mm,
whatever,
yeah.
which is in my eyes a wonderful, wonderful thing. And just some of the scenery is just staggering.
It's amazing. I'm very lucky in that I spent a lot of years working in the Yorkshire Dales.
Yeah,
And if you felt a bit down at work, you would just drive up into the Dale somewhere
yeah,
and pop into some random farmyard, and there'd be a farmer there. And within 5 minutes, you're best mates. You're
yeah,
having a cup of tea and talking about what's going on. So
yeah,
I have genuinely fallen in love with the place over the 30 years that I've been here,
yeah,
and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else now. I
yeah, yeah, yeah,
genuinely wouldn't.
yeah,
So we've talked about Salamanca. Have you
yeah.
got any other big games that sit out
Well,
in your mind?
the thing is, a lot of the big games I played. I mean, I've been at the Wargames Holiday Centre. Oh my goodness me, crikey! We did Gettysburg. We've done oh crikey, Austerlitz,
Yeah.
Leipzig. There's been whatever Mark was putting on basically. Is that we did Isandlwana as well. So they've all been lovely. Sometimes I've been partly a spectator because I was covering them for the magazine or whatever.
Mm,
But a lot of the big games I've played over the years have been kind of imaginary games, just scenarios we've dreamt up as an excuse to get thousands of troops on the table. And of course, my Imaginations campaign weekends with the guys, what can I say? They've just been, even though I've not necessarily been playing in them, just
mm,
being there and witnessing them and helping to organize them, a bit like we were saying with Mark Freeth's experience. What can I say? I mean, people just have to look back through old copies of Battlegames or miniature war games with Battlegames, and they festoon the pages of
mm.
many issues of those magazines. And in the early days with my mate Guy, where we just did lots of particularly 18th century games, just piling as many figures as we could cram onto whatever table we had at the time, almost for the challenge of being able to maneuver in spite of having so many troops, because there is that kind of this is the other thing with big games, isn't it, that you don't get with small skirmisher games. There's the traffic jam aspect, which again is a genuine command and control issue where you've got that amount of space. And this would be the job of the quartermaster general or whatever, setting out the ground and saying, right, that division goes there, that division goes there. And you have to fit your troops into that space and in a way that's not only meaningful so that it makes them the most potent they can be in the battle, but if something goes wrong, can those units in front actually retreat through or past the units that are just behind them? Arranging your army properly, not in a single flimsy line, but in multiple lines, usually 2 or 3 lines. That's a real challenge, being able to manage a force that's arrayed in multiple lines of battle, and then the units of the front get eroded. If you leave them there, they're just going to break and panic and spread panic. So how do you deal with that? In terms of specific games, like I said, the Salamanca is the one that always lives in my memory because it was so unexpected.
The great victory.
Well, when Peter Gilder said, "Right, you lot are the French," it was like, "Oh shit!" Right? Anyone who'd read anything about the history of the Peninsular War knows, the French had the poo kicked out them at Salamanca. This isn't going to go well. So that moment where, oh my god, I think we're going to do this. Fantastic. I've witnessed Waterloo. Again, interviewing Mark Urban the other day, who is a big American War of Independence fan. And many years ago, the first time I met him, he was running a big American War of Independence game, which was the siege Battle of New York or Long Island, I think.
Long Island, yeah. I've seen that one.
And Dave Brown was running a huge 15mm Waterloo. Now that was fascinating, if nothing else because of the acrimony amongst the French commanders. Again, going back to team spirit and all the rest of it, there wasn't much team spirit and evidence amongst the French that day. I think that's fair to say. But that was memorable because, it looked beautiful. All the miniatures, I should say, those beautiful Anthony Barton Battle Honours 15mm figures, which look gorgeous. And there were thousands of them. And they'd Dave had made Dave or one of his mates from the Loughton Strike Force had made a beautiful La Haye Saint and an incredible Hougoumont models.
Oh, brilliant.
They just, and I think for a battle like Waterloo, you have to get those set pieces right, don't you? If your Haye Saint, oh Christ, it's just some crappy old Airfix kit. And your Hougoumant's made from flimsy cardboard. It's not going to do the job, is it? No. So those two set pieces were beautiful. And it's the same as other big games I remember. If you look at, Rorke's Drift, done on almost pretty much a 1-to-1 scale. I've seen that done as well. Just looks amazing. So I almost feel like you made me feel like a bit of a fraud here, Ken, that I can't say, oh, yes, we've done that historical battle and that one and that one and that one and that one and that. It's just happened. But that's partly because I've not been a member of a club.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the differences that often club projects, aren't they? They're, let's do Leipzig, let's do Dresden, let's do whatever it happens to be. And I've just not kind of been party to that sort of arrangement.
No worries. Well, it's lovely to hear your memories of big games because that's kind of what this section's all about. And we've done an hour on that as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, we should be back very, very shortly for the feature section, which I know some of you are looking forward to. There you have it. We are 2 hours and 37 minutes into this podcast, and we have reached halfway point, would you believe? And I decided to draw a line on it there and do the second half next week. So if you've come this far, I'm sure you'll want to listen to the rest of it next week. A very, very enjoyable chat with Henry. It always is. And I know he's done a lot of podcasts in the past and spoken to a lot of people, both as an interviewer and as a guest. And I wanted to maybe try and get a few different things from him, and hopefully I managed to do that. Hopefully now you understand the Hairdryer Mud Rant as the title of this episode. And we're going to be literally back next Friday with the second part of this episode. So until then, look after yourselves. Hopefully you'll get a game in this week sometime and be ready for next Friday. So until then, see you.